Chapter 467. After returning to the Midsurda world that was riddled with holes, the third-in-command of the dimensional garrison issued a dispatch order to the Midsurda ground forces through the duty ship. In fact, strictly speaking, the number of troops in the Midsurda world itself was certainly not less than the fleet that Loren Vesa, the thief, had spent nearly 10,000 years to pull up. But because the other party had paralyzed the communication of the Midsurda army by some means, all the branches were in a predicament of not knowing what to do. The places that were attacked had no way to call for reinforcements, and the places that were not attacked were afraid that the garrison would be destroyed by the enemy as soon as they left the garrison. Lux's duty ship naturally could not achieve the effect of broadcasting to the whole world. After all, it was different from the whole world that only referred to the Earth in other novels. This was a real world. In the end, it was Ing, who was in half-open mode, who provided help for them to achieve this. After that, things were much simpler. The legions that obeyed the dispatch could naturally surround and defeat the enemy as instructed. The legions that disobeyed the dispatch would be rubbed against the ground by Su Shinqing, who descended from the heavens. After rubbing against them, they would have to obediently listen to the instructions. Fortunately, there were not many people who needed Su Shinqing to rub against them. After receiving the instructions, many of the garrisons seemed to have a backbone. They immediately turned around and beat up Loren Vasa's army. Therefore, the finishing work did not take too much time for Su Shinqing. But then Su Shinqing learned a piece of bad news. Just like the leader, who was blown into pieces in front of them, Loren Vasa seemed to have targeted the Midsurda people as a key target to attack. Although Loren Vasa's counterattack did not succeed because of Su Shinqing and the other outliers, the initial wave of attack wiped out all the surviving Midsurda people of this era. In other words, Midsurda, which had established 4 major organizations, including the Space Administration, would become a civilization that existed in name only. This isn't good. Roland showed a distressed expression after he understood the current situation. Losing the leader, who can make judgments on various matters, is a huge loss for them, but more importantly, Midsurda's most precious treasure will be destroyed because of this. What is Midsurda's most valuable treasure? Su Shinqing couldn't help but ask because he heard a new term. To put it simply, it's an existence similar to a UK. It looks like a huge tree stump on the outside, but it can perform special processing on information and condense a special crystal with self-consistent laws. Almost all the dimensional spaceships in Midsurda were able to travel through time and space because of treasures. Ying's avatar replied, however, only the people of Midsurda can use the treasure. This is also the main reason why Midsurda can become the center of the world. Then Lux, who was next to Su Shinqing, also added some simple common sense to him. Although it was not that there were no other ways to make dimensional spaceships other than using treasures, those methods generally had extremely high production costs and did not have the characteristics of replicability. Some sovereign worlds even had to gather the manpower and material resources of the entire world to barely make a dimensional spaceship that could sail to Midsurda. Such a poor country was already the object of envy of other worlds. One could imagine how rare dimensional travel technology was. In the worst case, because Midsurda will be united, the sovereign worlds that make up this system will divide up the heritage of Midsurda. In the end, the Midsurda civilization will completely fall apart, the hooded priest said calmly. There was no sense of worry in his voice at all. This was not an alarmist talk. Although there was a balance between the 4 major organizations, after all, the 4 major organizations were made up of countless people from other worlds. In the past, there was still the Midsurda people to supervise their will. However, now that this kind of supervision had disappeared, those people from other worlds would inevitably start to seek higher welfare for their own world. In the end, the future of Midsurda could already be foreseen. Su Shinqing felt that they seemed to be discussing something very serious, so he resisted the urge to ask, "What does this have to do with me?" or "Can I go back now?" and tried his best to listen to their quarrel. However, his patience was limited. After a while, he could not help but stomp his feet, causing the ship to shake. This stopped those people from continuing to quarrel. Don't tell me that Midsurda people really don't exist anymore? Could it be that there are natives who are temporarily not in Midsurda because of missions? he asked impatiently. Well, because of the size of the Mid-Serta people, they basically won't leave this world, Lux replied with a bitter smile. Moreover, every Mid-Serta person has an extremely strong and very special biological ability, which can be easily detected by quantum radar. However, there is no trace of them in this world at all. Even though he did not continue, Su Xinxing understood what he meant. 80% of the natives in this world were dead. There was no saving them. If what the leader of the rebel army said is true, then I'm afraid that after the Mid-Serta people almost destroyed their world, they realized that they had done something that seemed to be wrong. Therefore, from that time onwards, they have been holed up in their own world and no longer casually expand outwards. Even to maintain the order of the dimension, they would rather use people from other worlds. Old Man Who the Goat also let out a long sigh. So, old man, what are you trying to say? Is it great that we are not working for a deranged civilization? Roland sneered, looking depressed. Then, he suddenly noticed that Lux seemed to be staring blankly at Su Xinxing and could not help but be curious. Lux? In the world where Lux came from, the people were all hermaphrodites, so they were not in the state of being in love. Therefore, the dispirited uncle was not worried about Su Xinxing's anus, but was curious about Lux's behavior. I remember now. Lux slammed the main control computer, looking extremely excited. If I'm not wrong, not all Mid-Serta people are dead. There should be survivors. What did you say? Roland was shocked at first, then showed a look of surprise. Where is it? Lux glanced at Su Xinxing, then opened the star map of the Mid-Serta world. Chapter 468. After Lux's executive ship arrived at the destination according to the star map, Su Xinxing realized that something was wrong. This place is subtly familiar. The silver planet that appeared in front of them did not seem to have been affected by the previous war, and it still maintained its previous appearance. But this was normal after all. The total number of dimensional battleships of Lorraine was less than 500,000. Although dimensional battleships could be considered invincible to invade ordinary civilizations, the garrison of Mid-Serta was not to be trifled with. In addition, Mid-Serta's degree of development of the universe was quite high, and colonial planets were spread all over the universe. Even Lauren's battleships could only be used to attack more important places, such as the first star. If Lorraine did not paralyze Mid-Serta's communication in some way, it would not be long before he was beaten by Mid-Serta's army, just like what happened not long ago. Can you see it? Lux seemed to be in a good mood, and even whistled. It seemed that this place was not attacked, which made him feel a lot more at ease. Intuition. Su Xinxing gave a simple answer. When the executive ship passed through the planet's atmosphere and was about to land, Su Xinxing guessed where this place was from the local architectural style. This is the planet that said that they were going to judge me? He looked at the towering buildings and asked curiously. Yes. Lux nodded. As for the leaders of the 4 major organizations behind them, if they weren't secretly swallowing their saliva, they were subconsciously wiping their cold sweat. The old man with the goatee was of a rather special race. When he was nervous or guilty, he would use a very loud and clear voice to blow his nose. Then their eyes fell on Roland, who was sitting on pins and needles. At this moment, because of differences in race, culture, and even aesthetics, the thoughts of the Mid-Serta's higher-ups were 400% in sync. Damn, it turns out that when we didn't know, the Space Administration actually caught such a peerless monster for trial. Do you think that the world will be destroyed too late, so you want to make trouble? Roland also felt uneasy and subconsciously shrank his neck. But he immediately stared back. Damn it, if it weren't for my people bringing him here, Mid-Serta might have really died. Unlike Emily, who was eating pancakes and watching the show, Su Xinxing obviously did not notice that the group of people behind him, who could theoretically be regarded as the highest class in the world, were acting pantomime. He just frowned and looked at the external scene displayed on the screen in front of the bridge. Originally, he thought that Lux's sudden descent into the atmosphere and directly landed on the ground would not coincidentally land in the place he knew before. But apparently, the surrounding scene told him that this was the place where he had stayed before he came to this planet. When the maintenance staff went to take shelter, They did not even have time to remove the emergency repair sign on the building next to it. Just as he was puzzled, the ship came to a complete stop. So, under the lead of Lux, a group of people went down from the executive ship. Logically speaking, now that the more important planet of Mid-Sirta had been blown to pieces, this group of people should theoretically rush back to the place they were responsible for as soon as possible. While stabilizing the morale of the troops, they should shoulder the heavy responsibility of reviving the planet. But the orphan of Mid-Sirta was too important to this world. In order to ensure the authenticity of the news, they chose to come together. Only Xiang, who temporarily needed to be the transfer point of information of the entire universe, could only stay on the initial star and could not come along. The energy supply of the planet seems to have been cut off. Lux led a group of people to the bottom of the building and tried to operate the panel a few times, but to no avail. Then he said, awkwardly, "It's normal to cut off the energy supply during a war, otherwise, the accumulation of energy or a short circuit may cause secondary damage." Old man who nodded and explained like a narrator. Su Xinxing nodded noncommittally. As early as when he discovered that there was not even a speck of light at the Stargate, he vaguely guessed this possibility. "It's okay, let's teleport over." The hooded man from the Ether Order waved his hand like a master, and everyone felt that the surrounding scenery suddenly changed. When they came back to their senses, they were already at the top of the building. It was only at this time that everyone started to guess. Although before this, apart from cheering for that Mr. Together with them, this cleric from the Ether Order did nothing else, but in terms of individual combat power, this guy might be able to completely destroy everyone present except for the two of them. Speaking of which, I keep feeling that something is not right. Old man who muttered softly. "So you have this feeling too?" "Actually, I also feel that something is missing." The decadent Uncle Roland also nodded in agreement. "Wait a minute, Mr. Su is missing." Lux revealed the truth. So everyone looked around in panic, but they could not find Su Xinxing's figure on the rooftop. Finally, their eyes focused on Emily, who had finished eating the pancake and was licking her hands. After licking her hands, the little girl squinted her eyes and showed a satisfied expression. Then she noticed that she seemed to have become the center of attention. She tilted her head and thought for a moment, then hammered her hands, as if she understood what this group of people was looking for, and pointed below the rooftop. When everyone returned to the first floor, they only saw Su Xinxing squatting on the ground with a sad face, making an OTZ pose. "I'm so stupid, really," he said with a pained expression. "I only know that teleportation magic has no effect on me, but I didn't know that this kind of supernatural teleportation also has no effect on me. Although a magic-resistant physique was very useful in many cases, it was often like this kind of beneficial effect would also be indiscriminately ignored, which was very troublesome." By the time he remembered that Emo Li's magic was effective on him, or that he could let someone who could fly carry him up, Su Xinxing had already inserted his fingers into the superalloy wall and spent more than 10 minutes climbing to the rooftop that was hundreds of meters high and short. After finally reaching the destination, Su Xinxing realized that this was not the freaking room where he was previously interrogated. Although he had only taken half a step in, the multiple layers of space in the room seemed to have collapsed directly. At this time, Su Xinxing was suddenly enlightened. "You mean," he looked at Lux in disbelief, "that little thing that was almost eaten by Emo Li is a Mid-Sirta?" Before the trial, Emo Li did accidentally, forgive me for not having other words to describe it, eat a strange creature. He remembered that it was a palm-sized creature with dragonfly-like wings on its back. At first glance, it looked like a fairy. But that thing's face was extremely ugly, as if it had been splashed with sulfuric acid and forced to live to a ripe old age. Moreover, in Su Xinxing's understanding, Mid-Sirta should be the kind of super-giant creature that was more than 12,000 kilometers tall. Standing in the pockmarks on its face, it should be similar to standing in the Torpon Basin. Such a palm-sized thing could not even be compared to the other party's Miqingzi, could it? Mid-Sirta's lifespan is extremely long. It will grow bigger as it grows. Lux was very open-minded. "I remember that in biology, this is called perversion." "Isn't perversion used to describe those who like to wear underwear on their head and have mental problems?" Su Xinxing muttered softly. "Uh-huh. This joke isn't funny at all. Lux just laughed. I remember that on Earth there are things called tadpoles. The process of them turning into toads is called perversion. Su Shinxing felt that if he encountered this problem in the future, he would be able to stick out his chest and say, "My creature was taught by a person from another world." Although this was nothing to be proud of. Landlord. Emily called Su Shinxing. When Su Shinxing turned around, the girl gave him a thumbs up and said with a sense of accomplishment in her eyes, "Don't mind. My creature didn't learn well either." Su Shinxing felt like he saw Emily's eyes emit a ding. So, this was nothing to be proud of. But isn't that potato? I mean the last mid-Serta in the chaotic space? How do you plan to fish it out before it starves to death? Because Su Shinxing felt that his IQ had been pulled down to Emily's level, he could only try to convince himself, "It's okay, at least I got into a university," while trying to change the topic. Although I was just guessing before, now that things have come to this, I can probably confirm it. Lux smiled slightly and replied, "The sudden collapse of the multidimensional space is most likely because of you, Mr. Su."
Me?
Su Shinxing pointed at his nose, then thought carefully, and felt that there was nothing wrong with it, although he was different from the holy sword of the end, Rolander, and wouldn't cause the world to collapse wherever he went. His level of existence wouldn't be low either. He did not need to care about an ordinary world, but this kind of multidimensional space was probably created based on the information technology of mid-Serta. In this way, it was normal for his data to be too large and cause the other party to crash. I'll say this in advance. Thinking of this, Su Shinxing raised his index finger. His expression was unprecedentedly serious, even more serious and cold than when he fought with Dajita of Loren Visa. The leaders of the 4 major institutions felt that the temperature of the surrounding air seemed to have dropped a lot. Accompanied by the sound of old man who blowing his nose, Su Shinxing said slowly, "Kill me if you want, but I will never accept a fine." Lux. Chapter 469. Although he was a little puzzled by Su Shinxing's shamelessness, Lux's intuition told him that it was better not to delve too deeply into this. "No, what I mean is, Mr. Su, you can split open space, right?" In the end, Lux could only ask Su Shinxing, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Splitting open space isn't difficult. Hearing that he didn't have to pay for the damage to the facility, Su Shinxing immediately returned to his previous lively state. Then, to the group of big shots from the 4 major organizations who were asking him, "Splitting open space isn't difficult?" He scratched his cheek awkwardly and said, "But controlling my strength is a problem. If I accidentally use too much strength, I might even cut down the people in the space." Previously, one of Su Shinxing's disciples from the future once told him that in the future, or in another world, old Su could actually split open the timeline in half a year. But after that, even with the help of Emily, it took him a full 10 years to master the exact time to split open the timeline. It could be seen that Su Shinxing's destructive power was indeed very strong, but at the same time, his control of his strength wasn't particularly precise. For example, when he was fighting, his excess strength would always spread to the surroundings. Although the visual effect was very cool, this situation where he couldn't precisely control his strength wasn't something to be proud of. Of course, it couldn't be said that Su Shinxing was too lazy. After all, 3 years ago, he was just a normal person. Even if he once entered the time warp space during his adventure, which caused the actual time he experienced to be far longer than 3 years, the strength he possessed was still abnormal. It was just like a certain person whose attributes were all the same. If it weren't for the fact that he had spent a lot of inhuman training, it would be incredible for him to be able to live on Earth like a normal person even if he accidentally blew up a star. In fact, in terms of the proportion of his strength control, Su Shinxing could be said to be one of the best people he had ever met. For example, his former teacher could cut a piece of orichalcum in half with one slash, but the paper underneath the orichalcum would remain intact. This was the result of his control over his strength as a great swordsman. But when it came to old Su, even if he could control his strength to 1/1000th, he would still be able to blow up a star with a wave of his hand. It was because of this that Su Shinxing felt very distressed when he realized that even if he returned to Earth, his strength was still gradually increasing. In short, Splitting open space was indeed very simple for Su Xinxing, but it was a little difficult to split an unfamiliar man-made space without hurting the existence inside it. Your understanding may be a little wrong. Lux waved his hand. What I mean is, can you split open these collapsed spaces again? You don't need to split open the space itself, just separate the stacked spaces. That's not possible, is it? The goateed old man almost shouted out loud. As one of the spatial experts of the Magic Science Research Society, how could he not understand this situation? If it was an ordinary space collapse, it was still possible to revert to the situation before the accident through reverse information engineering. But now, multiple overlapping spaces had collapsed together, and the information of different spaces were entangled with each other, and it was impossible to separate them using ordinary methods. At this time, the only way was to activate the concept weapon, forcibly clear part of the entangled space information, and then evacuate the people and valuables inside, and finally directly delete the space debris to prevent information distortion. Oh, I can try this. Obviously, Su Xinxing could not hear the old man's thoughts, but his eyes lit up as he summoned his holy sword of finality. But he still could not find a place to start after gesturing at the cracked door frame for a long time, and could only look to the side in the end. His gaze swept past old man who, causing the latter to show a dejected expression, and finally stopped on Emily, who seemed to be planning to slack off. So the little girl's face showed a gloomy expression of, I always feel that the hard work is all done by me. But she still ran to Su Xinxing's side and whispered in his ear for a while. Su Xinxing nodded, showing a look of, I see. Then he waved his hand to let Emily back down, and he raised Roland Duel again, and swung his sword at the seemingly dark space inside the door frame. At first, nothing happened. If it was not for the fact that the scene of Su Xinxing single-handedly challenging a world was so shocking that there was still a lingering effect, perhaps some people would have laughed out loud. Su Xinxing did not seem to realize this, and once again swung his sword inside twice. This is not just a few random slashes, right? Roland asked curiously in a low voice. Most likely so. Old man who could not see why, and could only nod in agreement with the former's guess. On the other hand, the Ether Order's hood, Sammy Alfredo, did not seem to notice this at all, and just stood there motionless. After a moment, he said softly, The Ether will guide us forward. What are you mumbling about again? Roland asked softly. The Ether has been separated, the hood replied slowly. So, this mysterious saying of yours. Wait a minute, Ether? Roland was just about to complain out of habit, but he immediately understood the meaning of the hood's words. Ether was a void substance that existed in the space between worlds. In Mid-Sirta, it was generally used as a blocking agent in the multidimensional technology. When the space collapsed, the Ether, as a blocking agent, would deposit. But now that the Ether had been separated, it was once again acting as a blocking agent. In other words, the collapsed space was actually separated. This is incredible. Roland could only sigh in amazement. In the infinite number of worlds, there will always be one or two life forms that cannot be measured by common sense. The hood did not mock Roland as usual, but instead said with concern, So in front of this kind of monster, it is better for us to forget all our common sense. At the same time, after discovering that Su Xinxing had really succeeded in splitting the world, Lux immediately tried to operate the device outside the door frame. After a moment, a sprite the size of a palm with a potato-like face rolled out of the door. Seeing its appearance, other than Su Xinxing, everyone was pleasantly surprised. After the sprite stopped rolling, it raised its big face, and the first person it met eyes with was Emily. Emily expressionlessly chewed on the bait he took from Lux's ship. So dark, so scary. Then the potato held its head and screamed. It seemed that the way Emily ate had unintentionally triggered the sprite's psychological trauma for the sake of the remaining Mid-Sirta people's mental health. In the end, Su Xinxing took Emily and left the place first. Under Su Xinxing's strong request, Lux also rejected the idea of treating Su Xinxing and the others to a meal here and planned to send them back to their own world. In short, thank you so much for this. If it wasn't for you, I really don't know what would have happened. In the bridge, Lux said to Su Shinching, "Is there a bonus? How about Midsurda's information currency? Then forget about it." Su Shinching's face was full of disdain. "But the 4 major organizations in Midsurda all owe you a favor. I believe that if you need any help in the future, as long as it's within their capabilities, they will help you." Lux didn't mind and instead happily said to Su Shinching,
"Oh."
Su Shinching replied indifferently. To be honest, there were countless people who owed him favors. Up until now, other than Qin Xingyan, no one had truly repaid him in the truest sense. Well, I mean in the sense of repaying him in the form of RMB. Suddenly, a communication was connected to the bridge. Ying's face appeared on the screen. "Can you dock your ship with my Violet, Luke?" Lucian asked. "I have something to ask Mr. Su." Lux glanced at Su Shinching. The latter nodded indifferently. A moment later, with a slight tremor, the 2 spaceships docked together in a subtle and somewhat wretched manner. Because Lux still had to take care of the ship, Su Shinching only took Emily to Ying's Violet. If Lux's ship was a futuristic minimalist style full of sci-fi, then Ying's Violet had a more retro style. There were also some decorative patterns that seemed useless, but were actually useless. When Su Shinching followed the road signs formed by light spots to the bridge and founding, he found that the girl was holding a strange, basketball-sized creature with a serious face. It was probably a combination of a hermit crab and a tortoise. "Sorry, I called you here when you were planning to go back." Ing, who still hadn't changed back to her original appearance, spoke first in the half-open mode. "It's okay. Compared to this, what's the matter?" Su Shinching didn't mind at all. He even joked, "Are you planning to go to our world again for a while? If there's a chance in the future, I should do that." Ing didn't know if Su Shinching was joking or if she was just playing along with Su Shinching. She replied, "But because the group of moles in the Ether Order released a lot of dangerous UKs, I probably won't be able to go back for a while." After a pause, she continued, "This time I called you here because I have something to tell you. To be precise, I have something to tell you, Mr. Su." "What is it?" Su Shinching looked puzzled. "This is a UK 77 crystal ball crab. I'm sorry, it's not food. Please don't drool over it, Miss Emily." Ing showed the strange creature in her hand, but Su Shinching couldn't see any relationship between this thing and a crystal ball. Then she said, "The crystal ball crab can spit out bubbles with a certain image. Because those bubbles look like crystal balls, that's how it got its name. So you called us here because of the prophecy?" Hearing what she said, Su Shinching could almost guess her purpose. No wonder this thing is foaming now. It must be because it spat out bubbles just now. No, it's foaming purely because it predicted something beyond its ability. If it wasn't for the fact that UKs won't die so easily, I'm afraid they'd be dead by now. But even so, because of its own instinct, it took the risk that even UKs would die to make a prophecy. Ing said with a bitter smile. Then she looked at Su Shinching seriously. "Originally, I just wanted to see my future situation and see when I can change back to my previous appearance. After all, the influence I have on the world in this half-open mode is not small. But I didn't expect to see a scene related to you. To be honest, it was a scene I couldn't even understand at first. Just looking at the scene made me feel like my rationality was being burned, gradually pulling my rationality into the abyss. And the crystal ball that carried the future self-destructed because the prophecy itself was too heavy. Fortunately, as the cancer of the world UK 002, one of the oldest UKs discovered so far, my mind isn't so easily burned." She sighed, and her voice became heavier. "Now that I think about it, it's probably a prophecy made by the creature to avoid the worst ending. That was not deliberately mystifying." Su Shinching could even hear the slight tremor in the girl's voice as if she was afraid of something. "Your power will continue to grow in the following time. And the extent of this growth is not something you can control." Su Shinching was stunned at first, and then immediately realized that the girl was talking about a prophecy related to him. Thus, he silently waited for the other party to continue. "Very soon, your power would become so great that it would affect the existence of every world. That sort of power that far surpasses the energy level of the multiverse itself is just that frightening. Everything would collapse one after another due to imbalance, be it what you love deeply or what you hate, be it what you've saved or what you've destroyed. Everything would be annihilated into nothingness, and in the end, only you alone would be left. It's a pity that even Miss Jasmine would not be spared. If you don't wish to watch as every world is affected by your power one after another, there's only one choice. You will kill yourself then. The girl looked at Su Xinqing quietly. The time limit is about 3 years later. Leave of absence and the prizes from the previous lottery. Well, because the plot has entered a more important point, the chapter that was supposed to be updated today has been overturned and rewritten several times, but I'm still not satisfied. In order to better express this plot, I may have to sort out my thoughts a little bit. Today I'll take a leave of absence, and tomorrow I'll submit a 5,000-word update. Definitely not Guga. In addition, the previously ordered prizes have finally arrived. The details are as follows. That's it. Also, please hurry up and contact me if you haven't contacted me yet. I'll repeat the list of winners here. Third prize, Genius Red Panda, GHC 1231, contacted. Changnung, gave up prize. Otaku 9, Passerby in the book second prize. Wind Demon Yu, Red and White Witch, I Am a Ship first prize. Light Cruiser Ninghai Chan special prize. Ming Cha Training Heart, contacted. Chapter 470. Well, although it's a little disappointing to ask this, I still think I said something very serious. After a moment of silence, Ing, who did not wait for Su Xinqing's reply, asked in confusion, "Why don't you guys look nervous at all?" "No, that," Su Xinqing scratched his face and said with a wry smile, "Actually, whether it's me or Emily, we're not the kind of people who believe in prophecies." Hearing this, Jasmine nodded as well. But so far, the crystal ball crab's prophecies have all come true. Ing, who had witnessed the magic of UK 77, said stubbornly, "I think you guys should pay more attention to it. In fact, foreseeing the future doesn't exist at all." Su Xinqing refuted her statement. All foreseeing the future is actually just a targeted understanding of the most likely future through the operation of the ability. In other words, there are other possibilities of the future. But generally speaking, if there is no external interference, isn't this the most likely future to happen? Ing wasn't so easily convinced. That's just a general theory. The future can be changed, and there only needs to be one reason to change it. Su Xinqing grinned. "And that's because it involves me. But isn't your power increasing uncontrollably?" Ing immediately found a reason to refute. "That's true, but in fact, this isn't the first time I almost dragged all the worlds to the brink of destruction," Su Xinqing replied with a wry smile. "But because of this, I found a way to solve this situation." Seeing that Ing didn't believe him, Su Xinqing continued, "How about this? I'll tell you a story. It was not long after I became a hero. No, to be precise, it was the story after I was just abandoned. The world that summoned me was called Auravia. Although it was a world, it actually only had 2 or 3 colonial planets, and they were all satellites in the orbit of the mother planet. When I arrived in that world, the situation had already developed to a very bad degree. Large areas of territory were invaded by the Demon King's army. Even if the native residents fought hard, they had little effect. It was probably because of this that they used the method of summoning heroes to borrow external forces. Unfortunately, when I arrived in that world, I didn't immediately receive the power of a hero. Considering the physique of an earthling, I was even weaker than the weakest warrior in the kingdom. After discovering this and patiently waiting for more than a month without any improvement, the king finally became angry and threw me out of the castle. Yes, I was grateful to him for giving me a bag of silver coins for my travel expenses. But at that time, if he had sent me back, I would have been happier. Also, after a long time, I found out that the silver coins were given to me, but that wasn't important. In the end, I didn't want to live a precarious life. In the end, I joined the mercenary group and began to follow behind the seniors to gain experience. Maybe it was not meant to die, or maybe it was the protagonist's aura. Anyway, after a long time, not only did I not die, but I also grew quite a bit. In the words of my teacher, I became a qualified mercenary. Auravia was a civilization that was quite advanced in magic. Even a warrior would generally master 2 or 3 practical spells, but unfortunately, I wasn't in the category of ordinary. That's right, I didn't know how to use a single spell. Fortunately, after that period of training, my skills were not bad, so the leader specially appointed a mage to be my partner. The name of the other party was Govy Iris, a white elf. On Earth, which was my hometown, many literary works described the elves as very beautiful. Yes, that was the truth. Govy Iris had a nearly perfect face, with long hair ranging from emerald green to light yellow. Although her body was a little skinny due to lack of nutrition, it gave her a delicate and pitiful feeling. But the thing that left the deepest impression on me was her eyes. Those were eyes that were as bright as emeralds. Before I transmigrated, I didn't even know that there were eyes that could be described as bright in this world. Like most of the members of the mercenary group, Govy's hometown had also fallen, and it was said that it had fallen early. However, Govy herself didn't feel depressed because of this, and was very optimistic and cheerful. Now that I think about it, maybe I had some feelings for the girl at that time. It wasn't love, just a good feeling. Using the words of my childhood sweetheart, I seemed to be less emotional than ordinary people. In short, because we became partners, the two of us naturally spent more time alone together. At this time, the advantage of being from Earth came out. Even some jokes that were so outdated that they were about to grow mushrooms on Earth could make Govy laugh nonstop. Of course, this also had something to do with Govy's love of laughter. Govy's strength was also very outstanding. Some low-level spells only needed 1 syllable to be activated. I wasn't too sure about the magic level in that world, but according to my observation, this kind of casting speed was considered good even among the court mages. It was just that Govy didn't seem to like the feeling of royalty, so she didn't accept the conscription. That should be the most comfortable period of time since I transmigrated. Although I had to participate in battles almost every day, that level of battle didn't bring me too much trouble after I got used to it. On the contrary, after the battle, I could eat, drink, and play without restraint. When I went back, there were beautiful elf girls waiting for me. It was very comfortable. Well, because we were partners, she lived next door to me. During that time, there was no happy news. Cough, improper things, so Emily, don't look at me like that. Happy times are always short. Well, I know this sentence is old, but this was really how I felt at that time. In the 3rd month after I transmigrated to that world, Govy and I received an important mission from a serious leader. The mission came from the royal family. The content was for us to pass through the blockade of the Demon King's army and then deliver a letter of cooperation to the Fairy King, who was separated by the Demon King's army, requesting cooperation between humans and fairies against the Demon King's army. The fairies didn't have a good impression of humans. In fact, before the invasion of the Demon King's army, most of the subhumans didn't seem to like humans. If there was a list of hostility, the ones at the top would definitely be the Demon King's army, but below them would be humans, and they were the kind that was at a slight disadvantage and temporarily ranked 2nd. So, the success rate of sending the letter by Govy, who is also of another race, seemed to be higher. Of course, in addition to our side, the king also sent other teams as long as one team was successful. Mercenary groups that were paid to do things would naturally consider the risks and rewards. If the whole team was dispatched to escort the letter, the cost would be too high, and it would be easy to be surrounded and annihilated by the Demon King's army. The risk was too great, so it was better to let a small team of 2 sneak in. Even if something went wrong and the 2 of us died, it wasn't an unacceptable situation for the leader. Chapter 471. In order to cover us, or several other teams with the same mission as us, the human kingdom launched a feint attack on the Demon King's army. Ironically, if you can find the world of Auravia and go to the planet I used to live on, you may be able to learn all this from the Aborigines there. The war later became known as the Battle of Dawn, and almost everyone believed that it was the beginning of the humans' counterattack against the Demon King's army. Until I left that world, People expressed the highest respect for the soldiers and officers who sacrificed their lives as heroes in that war, and even their reverence for them was much higher than the awe of the royal family. This was not excessive. Those who did not live in that dark era would never understand what a desperate environment it was. Humans lost more than 90% of their territory, and the other demi-humans were even more miserable. There were many alien races like Govi who had lost their homes. Only the goblins were spared because of their geographical location and the fact that most of their people lived in the space cracks. At first, I thought that the alliance with the fairies against the Demon King's army was the last resistance of the human leaders. In fact, not only me but even the commander and the others thought so, and he also said that if the Fairy King agreed to the alliance and the final battle against the Demon King's army really started, then they would definitely participate in the war. This was the bottom line of being a human. The day before the start of the operation, I saw an unexpected guest. The princess of the human kingdom, and also the one who summoned me to this world. Unlike her headstrong and self-opinionated father, the princess was a very amiable girl. I don't remember her name clearly, but I think it was Duomir or something. She had a head of long, honey-colored curly hair and a very beautiful appearance. Her eyes were amber, which matched her curly hair very well. She had a good reputation among the people and seemed to have always felt guilty about summoning an ordinary person like me to this world that was about to face destruction. For this reason, she was also the only person in the palace who often chatted with me. When I was kicked out of the palace, she also raised objections, but it was obviously of no use. If I used a slightly malicious way of thinking, perhaps it was because she was too close to me, and the king couldn't tolerate his daughter having any relationship with a piece of trash, so he chased me out of the palace. Back to the topic, this time she brought me incredible news. The words in the magically sealed letter were not an alliance letter seeking alliance with the fairies to resist and repel the Demon King's army. It was a letter willing to offer all the resources, treasures, and even other humans in the possession of humans to the Fairy King, only asking the Fairy King to bring the royal family and nobles on the list to the Fairy Kingdom where the fairies lived to avoid the war. When it came to this, even the princess, who had never shown anger in front of me, frowned slightly, obviously very dissatisfied. Under the instigation of the nobles who were greedy for life, her father, the last king of humans, actually did this kind of thing that was tantamount to losing his country. This can't go on. The future of the human race should not be destroyed in the hands of a group of cowards. Realizing this, Her Highness secretly visited the home of a small mercenary like me and told me everything because I was the only mercenary she knew and trusted. She undid the magic on the letter, changed the content to an alliance to resist the Demon King's army, and then solemnly handed the letter and her token to me. Passing through the territory of the Demon King's army was a risky task, but she firmly believed that I could do it. After that, if there were other messengers who were able to do the same, then the letter in my hands would be more trustworthy with the token in hand. Of course, she did not intend to stay in the rear and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. The next day, when we arrived at the barracks, we found that the princess had already launched a pre-war mobilization in front of the whole army. I asked the people in the barracks, and only then did I know that the princess had actually personally come to the front line as a frontline commander to fight with everyone. Regardless of whether the speech was useful or not, just this alone had an amazing effect on the morale of the army. I can't remember exactly what she said, but there was one sentence that left a deep impression on me. Even if you tear my body apart, drink my blood, chew my bones, and make my existence disappear from this world, they will not be able to destroy my courage as a human. My soul will guide you forward. Courage was contagious. When the first hero stood up, there would be no lack of other heroes on the battlefield. That's right. She went against the strategy set by those cowards and really led her army to fight against the Demon King's army. This made the feint that would have gone down in history for thousands of years to become the famous Dawn campaign. That was the beginning of everything, the last line of defense for human dignity and the origin of human courage. Interestingly, not only Olivia in my later life, I encountered similar situations in many other worlds. When humans were forced into a desperate situation, they would erupt with unimaginable courage and strength. Alright, I know I went off topic, but let's go back to the me of that time. As messengers, we naturally wouldn't be forced into the battlefield by the main army. The princess arranged a dragon carriage for us, intending to bypass the main battlefield and sneak in from the side. Not only us, but the other messengers also seemed to have their own arrangements. In short, it gave me the feeling that the princes and ministers seemed to have come up with all kinds of ways to send a letter to the fairy empress. The war was very fierce. No, considering the gap between humans and those monsters, it would be better to describe it as tragic. It was like a meat grinder, laying layer after layer of flesh and organs on the ground. Even if we didn't officially go to the battlefield and just went around from the side, the tragedy and shock were unforgettable. At first, it was a young man who helped us drive the dragon carriage. I had seen him around the princess before, so he should be the princess's guard. The princess went to the battlefield, but not only did she not strengthen her guards, but she also assigned her guards to us. It was obvious that she had placed her hopes on me. When we passed through the enemy's line of defense, we saw many demons rushing to the front line. There were inferior monsters similar to red-skinned goblins, but were actually much stronger, terrifying hell demons as tall as 3 or 4 stories, and terrifying beholders and great flame demons that were like towering flame tornadoes. The situation was obviously overwhelming, but for some reason, I felt that the thin line of defense could withstand the onslaught of these monsters. Later, it turned out that I was right. The power of determination was indeed terrifying. Although we were careful enough, we were still discovered by the enemy in the process of sneaking through the line of defense. It was a type of monster called the Butcher. Its body seemed to be sewn together from many pieces of corpses, but unlike ordinary stitch monsters, the Butcher was calmer and crueler, and its resistance to magic was stronger. I didn't notice that we were targeted by this monster at all, but the young guard noticed it. He pushed me, who was sitting next to him, into the carriage, but he was hooked by the huge iron hook of the Butcher's chain. The barb, which was as thick as a child's wrist, pierced the guard's lung. I saw blood bubbles coming out of his nose and mouth. I must complete the princesses. Before he could finish, the Butcher dragged him out of the dragon carriage, and he fell into the smoke raised by the dragon carriage. At that moment, I really wanted to turn the carriage around and defeat the Butcher. But my rationality told me that without the help of a priest, the young man could not be saved. Besides, the Butcher was very strong. I was definitely no match for him alone. Don't show that expression. At that time, I was just an ordinary person. Even if I had some talent in swordsmanship, I had only mastered a sword skill called Jackdaw's counterattack. Even with Govi's help, by the time I defeated the Butcher, more demons would have gathered. It would be difficult to escape then. In fact, even if I drove the dragon carriage at full speed, it would not be easy to escape. Fortunately, my partner was very helpful at that time. Her shooting magic was accurate and ruthless. Although it didn't cause too much damage to the Demon King's army, it still damaged their ankles, eyes, and other vital points, causing them to gradually lose the ability to chase after us. After we completely escaped from the enemy's pursuit, in order to prevent the dragon from suddenly dying after 3 hours of running, I deliberately let it rest for a while, and then continued forward at a slightly slower speed. This kind of cold-blooded creature could explode with great power, but its endurance was very poor. If it did not get enough rest, it would easily die. In the area occupied by the Demon King's army, Govi and I did not dare to sleep in the open. In the end, we took turns driving the dragon carriage, alternating between resting in the carriage. In the end, I only slept for 3 hours and Govi took a little longer. Of course, I did it on purpose. Compared to warriors, a stable mental state was more important for mages. When the horizon lit up slightly, we entered the grassland. I thought that the crisis was temporarily over, but the truth was not that simple. Huge ghost hawks began to appear in the sky. They were hellish creatures that looked a bit like the manta rays on Earth, with a wingspan of more than 7 meters. They were the most disgusting spies and eyes of the Demon King's army. They could fly high in the sky to carry out reconnaissance, and they could also prey on the owls trained by humans for reconnaissance. In addition, more than once, I saw the shadow of a two-headed hound in the grass. There was no doubt that the enemy had realized that someone had sneaked into their territory, and they were digging 3 feet into the ground to find us. During this time, we also passed by a place that was once a human city. There was almost no sign of human habitation there, and all the humans were treated as livestock and kept in captivity. In addition, mercenaries who were carrying out the same mission as us were also caught, and after being tortured, they were hung on the city wall. To them, dying in torture was a happier thing. Otherwise, they would have to watch helplessly as the birds from hell ate them into skeletons before finally taking their last breaths in that kind of despair and pain. The birds from hell seemed to have some kind of ability that allowed them to eat a person until only a head was left over for a certain period of time, without causing the other party to die. We also encountered deserters. The infiltration mission was not suitable for everyone. It caused a lot of psychological pressure, and it could easily drive people crazy. When people lost their rationality, it was natural for them to want to escape back to what little human territory they had left. Unfortunately, from the information I learned later, none of those deserters were able to escape the Demon King's army's defense line. On the contrary, the mercenaries who rushed to the Fairy Kingdom had a higher survival rate. Although in fact it was not that different, as we continued to move forward, the probability of encountering the enemy gradually increased. It was probably because they had found out about our destination from the captured mercenaries. Sometimes, in order to move forward faster, we had to fight the enemies we encountered. Especially when Govi's disguise magic could fool the ghost sparrow's eyes, but it was difficult to fool the two-headed hounds, who were known for their sense of smell. These monsters were said to be a lower subspecies of Cerberus, and it was very troublesome to deal with them. In the worst case, I could only face off against 3 two-headed hounds by myself. My swordsmanship, Jackdaw's counterattack, could only be used in a one-on-one fight. It was extremely disadvantageous for me to fight 3 of them at once. Of course, in the end, I paid the price of being injured and fought with my life. In this kind of bloody battle, I grew faster than I expected. If I had to say, that was probably the most dangerous period of my life. Even when I faced the Demon King later on, it was not as bad as it was. On the 3rd day of infiltration into the Demon King's territory, Govi and I were in a terrible state. Due to the lack of sleep, I was in a half-awake state. Govi, on the other hand, was always in a trance due to excessive spellcasting. Let alone chanting magic, she could not even concentrate. Even a newbie like me knew that if this continued, the situation would not be good. Not to mention spellcasters, even if it was a swordsman like me, when there was an abnormal state of mind, it was easy for flaws to appear in battle. A small trance was enough to end my fragile life. If this continued, the next battle would be the end of our lives. Thus, when we found a small lake, we decided to take a break. I roasted fish by the shore, and the girl bathed in the lake. During this time, because of the battles, my relationship with her became better, or rather, more tacit. At the same time, our understanding of each other was deeper than when we were in the mercenary group. I used to think that Govi was a lively and cheerful girl, but in fact, that was not the case. Occasionally, she would look at the sky in a daze. Even if the expression on her face did not change much, the side of her face, which was set off by her long hair fluttering in the wind, still gave people a feeling of sadness. Even if I did not ask her the reason, I could roughly guess that she was sad for her hometown that had fallen into the hands of the Demon King's army. In addition, she was also very gentle. Although she was a little subtle when it came to cooking, it was the kind of food that was clearly very proper but not very delicious. However, she was very good at sewing. My leather armor lining was sewn by her, or rather, I was a little surprised that she would bring a needle and thread for this kind of mission. Of course, she was not pretending to be cheerful and lively. When she saw the sun rise on the grassland for the first time, she was as excited as a 5 or 6-year-old girl. She even specially woke me up to watch the sunrise together. When we met groundhogs, she would specially dig them out to see if they could be used as food reserves. Of course, in the end, She did not let me roast them and let them go. On the way, we talked the most about Govi's hometown, the once glorious kingdom of the White Elves, and the story of Govi's childhood. She would always use a singing tone to talk about the beauty of the White Elves' kingdom built in the forest, and the artistic name that the White Elves' ancestors had once created. Then, she would foolishly share with me the embarrassing stories of her childhood, without any taboo. Every time that happened, I would quietly listen to her talk by the side. To be honest, I quite liked that kind of feeling. I once thought that I had fallen in love with her, but soon I realized that it was not love, but just pure liking. If I had to put it into words, it was at most a feeling of intimacy between friends due to the suspension bridge effect. "Sue, can you help me tie up my hair?" The drenched girl was wearing her spare clothes, which were made from a snow-white cloth similar to silk produced in the former kingdom of the White Elves. In addition, there were no undergarments like bras in this world. Now that they were soaked in water, they were somewhat exposed. However, the girl did not mind showing her back and her similarly dripping wet hair to me. "Why don't you use magic to dry it?" I asked. "Because I need to conserve magic and at the same time, relax my mind in preparation for the upcoming battle," the girl said matter-of-factly. Her hair was very good, and unlike humans, the hair of the elves seemed to be more slender. Even after tying it up, it did not give off the feeling of a large pile of hair. Instead, it gave off a slender and lively feeling. This was especially obvious when she moved. Of course, I knew what she meant. In fact, the White Elves did not seem to allow anyone other than their parents and spouse to touch their ears. However, when I was tying her hair, I touched it a few times, but Govi did not react. "Sue, what's wrong? In the future, can you always help me braid my hair?" There were times when I hated myself for being so clear-headed. Thus, when faced with the girl's confession, I could only brush it off. Right, I also learned the technique of braiding Lee's hair at that time. Why are you angry? Cough, in short, let's skip this part and continue the story. After that, when we were approaching the fairy kingdom, we encountered a few waves of enemies that we needed to fight. However, the battles were relatively easy. It was only when we were about to leave the Demon King's territory that we encountered a truly difficult opponent. That's right, it was the butcher that we met near the battlefront. We fought and retreated, all the way until we reached the Fairy Kingdom's territory. However, the enemies still chased after us. During this period, Govi and I were almost killed by him several times. The feeling of a hook shooting out from the darkness at any moment was too disgusting. That should have been the most difficult period of our lives. At the same time, because of the butcher's pressure, our ability to pay attention to our surroundings and our ability to think had decreased by a lot. We actually did not realize what it meant for this fellow to be able to chase us into the Fairy Kingdom's territory. Here, I have to mention the Fairy Kingdom of Auravia a little. Before the invasion of the Demon King's army, the Fairy Kingdom was called the Fairy Kingdom or Dreamland. In fact, only about 1/10 of it was on Auravia. The rest was attached to a space crack on Auravia. Therefore, the Fairy Kingdom was regarded as the most mysterious place, and there were even legends such as the Fountain of Youth. In addition, some of the fairies liked to collect treasures, so the Fairy Kingdom was full of gold and silver treasures. This was also very popular. It was probably because of this that the human aristocrats felt that as long as they offered their treasures, they could exchange for the protection of the Fairy Queen. The hub that connected the Fairy Kingdom and Auravia was the tree hole of a giant tree called the Sirius Tree. When the unbelievably large tree appeared in my field of vision, I was really happy at that time. But soon I realized that as long as the butcher was watching from the side, there was no way we could enter the Fairy Kingdom. "Govi, listen to me. I'm going to stay behind." Without waiting for me to finish, Govi interrupted me and snatched my line. "How can you leave the job of staying behind to a spellcaster? Don't be willful at this time." As long as I could delay the butcher and create a little free time, Govi could enter the Fairy Kingdom. And as a white elf, she had a certain friendship with the fairies, so letting Govi negotiate was the best choice. "Sue, how long can you delay the butcher?" 5 minutes. I estimated the combat power comparison and set a more conservative number. This was something I could only do if I bet my life. I can delay it for 5 hours. I would probably never forget the look in Govi's eyes at that time. It was a look full of determination. She said, "Rather than being prepared to die, it's better for the two of us to go back together and compare the price, right?" But the enemy is the butcher. I didn't believe Govi's 5-hour statement. Don't underestimate the White Elf's secret technique. I just didn't want to waste the casting materials of the secret technique before, but in this situation, it shouldn't be a problem to waste a little, right? She smiled slyly. Believe me, before I get your answer, I won't die so easily. Since she had said so, I couldn't continue to question her. So after we were ready, Govi used a portable magic formation to fight against the butcher, and I took advantage of that opportunity to use the quest item given by the king to open the gate to the fairy kingdom. Then, I saw the fairy kingdom in a mess, as if it had just been ravaged. Before we could ask for help, our only reinforcements had been defeated by the enemy. Chapter 472. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes, thinking that my judgment was wrong. If even the Kingdom of Fairies had been defeated by the Demon King's army, then the reason for our operation this time would be ridiculous. But the scorched earth that had been through the flames of war couldn't be faked. Even the fairies who were proficient in magic and loved to play pranks wouldn't set fire to hell in their own home. Then, the corpses of the Abyss Beastmen and fairies found near the entrance confirmed my guess. I didn't stay for long, but simply cut the rope on the shaft of the carriage, directly turned over and sat on the dragon, and ran on the blood-stained road. Gove told me that she could hold on for 5 hours, but this must be an exaggeration to reassure me. Even if I believed that there was only 20% of it, considering that I still needed to go back and forth, I could only search for combat forces that could help me at the moment for less than 2 hours. Almost only after thinking for a moment, I decided on the direction to go. Because it had only been about 3 months since I transmigrated, it was naturally impossible for me to have been to the Kingdom of Fairies. My understanding of this country, other than the occasional rumors I heard in the streets, was only the knowledge that I crammed a few days ago before I set off. Fortunately, the Kingdom of Fairies itself wasn't too big. In terms of area, it seemed to be only the size of a county in the outside world. And the place I was going to had an obvious landmark. It was a magnificent tree castle. On Earth, there was a saying that a single tree could make a forest. I remembered that it seemed to describe the banyan tree. But in Auravia, a single tree could make a forest. It wasn't a castle that was built with trees or built on trees. Instead, it was a living castle that was guided by magic to grow naturally from a huge tree that was similar in size to the Sirius tree, or even taller if one looked closely. Although in terms of height, the fairy castle couldn't compare to the Thunder King's castle built by humans, and there was some difference in grandeur compared to the burning steel city that the dwarves dug out from the ground, but in terms of magnificence, it was comparable. In addition, it was completely grown from trees, so it had a different kind of shock, enough to become a landmark building that the fairies were proud of. Even from afar, one could see the giant tree that grew alone on the plains. That was where the Fairy King was. In theory, it was also the most heavily guarded place in the Kingdom of Fairies. If the Fairy Kingdom or Celestial Kingdom still had an organized army, then they should be there. Riding my dragon, I galloped across the plains. I ran past the Fountain of Youth, which was said to be able to restore one's youth. This spring water contained a considerable amount of magic elements. Although it did not have the miraculous effect of eternal youth, it was indeed somewhat beneficial to humans. However, half of the Kraken's corpse had taken up most of the spring water. The stench of its blood had polluted the beautiful land, causing the Fountain of Youth to turn murky. The surrounding land was also a strange dark red. I ran through the legendary Golden Forest. The golden apples produced here were considered treasures in the outside world. At this time, Jean Shulin was in a mess, as if it had just been ravaged by a Category 12 typhoon. There was almost no complete tree. Even the legendary black dragon that protected Jean Shulin was only left with a broken corpse in the middle of the forest. Around it were many corpses of the Demon King's army. I ran past the Hill of Treasures, which was envisioned by the people. Before this, I had always thought that the Hill of Treasures was a small mountain of treasures. After all, Marco Polo had also used the phrase gold everywhere to describe the celestial kingdom of that era. But after coming here, I was surprised to find that the Hill of Treasures was actually made of gold, gems, and other precious treasures. But whether it was the Demon King's army or the fairies, they did not seem to attach much importance to this small hill that did not have much strategic significance. It was the only fairy wonder that was relatively intact on the road. After passing through the popular places in the outside world, I came to the plains where the Castle of Trees was located. What should have been a beautiful field of green was now a scene of devastation left behind by the flames of war. What puzzled me was that although the corpses of demons and fairies were everywhere until now, I had not seen a living Demon King's army. I did not know if this was a good sign. If the fairies had already defeated the Demon King's army, then it was a good thing. But it was better to be safe than sorry. If the Demon King's army had gained the upper hand and had already reached the interior of the Castle of Trees, then I would be walking into a trap. But at that time, I had no other choice. So I did not hesitate to head there. Before entering the fairy kingdom, it had dragged the carriage and ran, and after that, it was ridden by me. After running for almost half a day, it finally exceeded the limit of riding a dragon. Its leg twisted and it fell to the ground. After panting for a few breaths, it suddenly died. And, because of inertia, I was thrown a few meters away. After falling to the ground, I rolled a few times before stopping. If it was the me before I transmigrated, I would have been half dead from the fall or even lost the ability to move. But after 3 months of training and actual combat, it was not like I had never experienced this kind of situation before. When I landed, I maintained the posture of holding my head with both hands. Although that posture was not nice, it was able to protect my head to the best of its ability. Although my body was in pain from the impact, and after looking at it I estimated that there would be bruises all over my body, but I managed to maintain my consciousness and ability to move. I didn't give myself any time to catch my breath. I endured the pain and staggered the rest of the way to the tree castle. Then, I crawled into the entrance of the tree castle on my hands and knees. Corpses, corpses, corpses. The Castle of Trees was also filled with corpses. There were ghastly bloodstains all over the walls. The only thing that puzzled me was that, unlike the intense battle outside, the corpses in the castle didn't show any signs of a battle. It was as if everyone had been killed in their sleep. The previous fall also made my whole body burn with pain. I felt that it might be because I broke 1 or 2 bones. Perhaps many people would feel the same way. On the day of the injury, the wound would not hurt too much. Instead, it would only hurt the next day, as if there was a delay in the pain. After taking a deep breath, I continued to walk deeper into the castle. But the further I went, the more I felt that something was wrong. If the monsters of the Demon King's army could still be seen in those places, then the corpses lying on the ground with their blood drained out belonged to the fairy faction. After walking for a while, I suddenly found some clues. If I looked carefully, I could faintly see footprints covered in blood on the edge of the pool of blood on the floor. Thus, I began to follow the footprints. Now that things have come to this, I have no way out. If I can't find someone who can save us, then Govi's life will be in danger. I don't know if you've ever experienced a broken rib, but when I followed the bloody footprints, I found that the footprints seemed to be heading towards the upper floors of the castle. Every time I took a step on the stairs, my chest would ache faintly. In order to relieve this pain, I could only try to divert my attention elsewhere. For example, the footprints on the ground. According to the footprints' pace, the owner of the footprints was not running away in a panic. Instead, it was walking step by step, very steadily. Even the distance between the footprints seemed to be measured with a ruler. It was almost exactly the same. This made me have a bad guess. Could it be that the owner of the footprints was not a victim who was running away, but the murderer who killed all the living in the castle? While I was thinking, probably because we had reached a higher place, there were no more corpses around. Naturally, there were no more bloodstains. The dark red footprints became fainter and fainter until they finally disappeared on the stairs. Fortunately, there were no more forks in the road after that. The stairs led to a high platform at the top of the tree castle. After walking out of the stairs, my vision suddenly opened up. As perhaps the highest point in the entire fairy kingdom, the high platform of the tree castle allowed one to have a panoramic view of the small world drifting in Aurovia. In the past, it must have been a magnificent and beautiful scene. The fountain of youth that illuminated the sky, the golden forest that shone with golden light, the jeweled treasures, and many other wonders that I had never seen before. For example, the crystal-clear forest, the mushroom swamp that competed with each other for beauty, the river of life that flowed with sweet milk. But at this moment, this once beautiful world only gave off a feeling of desolation. Columns of smoke rose everywhere, like black pillars to the sky, reminding people of the fact that this place had been ravaged by the flames of war with their presence that could not be ignored. At the front of the high platform, there was a huge pure white sculpture that looked like a throne carved out of marble. At first glance, the sculpture looked like an eagle spreading its wings, or a fan-shaped screen made up of several giant swords. But this was not a real throne. Below the sculpture, there was a square platform. A person stood in front of the platform. He wore a long cloak with a swallowtail butterfly color scheme. His muscular right shoulder was exposed. His hair was gray and curly, like a judge's. Even though I could only vaguely see the side of his face, I could still see that he had a thick beard. Even with a conservative estimate, the person's height was at least 1.9 meters. His body was as burly as a bodybuilding champion. Even in the mercenary group, only the barbarian warrior from the Highlands had such exaggerated muscles. I didn't know if it was an illusion, but I felt a sense of sadness and despair from the other party. Then, I noticed the crown on the other party's head that was inversely proportional to his size. It was only about half the size of a palm. "Sorry," I asked aloud. "Are you His Majesty the Fairy Empress?" The other party's movement was obviously interrupted by my question. He slowly turned his head. As I guessed, the other party had a typical European face. The beard on his face was not at the level of a full beard, but closer to the level of a bearded man. It was just that his face was extremely gray, and it was not an exaggeration to describe it as withered. Obviously, a human's head could not turn 180 degrees, even if the other party was the Fairy Empress. So when he turned his head, his body was slightly sideways, allowing me to see what the other party was doing before he was interrupted by me. He was inserting a sword into the stone platform below the sculpture screen. The reason why he inserted it instead of pulling it out was that I could still see some blood on the blade. "Human, where are you from?" "I am from the Human King, requesting an alliance from you fairies." Because the other party's aura was too dangerous, coupled with his undisguised vigilance, I did not continue to move forward. I just took out the letter from Her Royal Highness and placed it on the ground in front of me. But the other party had no intention of accepting it. He didn't even bend down to pick up the soap, the letter. "Alliance?" The other party's face showed a sarcastic expression, but I didn't know whether he was mocking himself, me, or Her Royal Highness who wanted an alliance. "Yes, the world is facing a great disaster. Whether it is humans or fairies, only by uniting all the living forces can we fight against the Demon King's army." I buried my anxiety in the bottom of my heart, trying to show only sincerity on my face as I tried to persuade him. "Only one of your words is correct." However, the sarcastic expression on the other party's face became stronger, and he said lightly, "The world is facing a great disaster." "What do you mean?" At this time, even I, who was slow to react, heard something wrong in his words. "The world is facing a great disaster, but the disaster is not the Demon King's army, but me." "What?" I was shocked by the other party's words. "I think you have already vaguely sensed it." The other party continued, "The fairy kingdom no longer exists. Apart from me, all the fairies are dead." Although I did vaguely feel this way when he actually said it out loud, I was genuinely shocked. At the same time, I was even more worried about Gowie's situation. If there was no fairy army, how could I save her? But soon, I tried to focus on the current situation. Was it done by the Demon King's army? This strange situation made me feel a little uneasy. It was done by me, he confessed. About half of it, as expected. Aren't you the fairy king?
Why?
I couldn't understand his motive. The fairies have passed down a cursed demon's sword for generations. He let go of his hand and let me see the sword stuck in the stone platform. From its appearance, it was a very standard Western two-handed sword, but the person who made it might have been an artist or a master craftsman. In short, the gilded blade, the exquisite and unique hilt, the elegant-looking blade, and the inscriptions on the blade all made people feel that the sword was more like a work of art than a weapon. It was just that more than half of it was stuck in the stone, so I couldn't see the sword tip. Before every immortal king took office, they were warned that unless the fairy race was in a desperate situation where they were about to be destroyed, they must never take out the sword that was guarding the center of the tree root. He slowly said, I thought that I would be like my father, never having to use this sword in my life. But I didn't expect that because of a small oversight, those monsters would escape into the immortal kingdom. My people were killed by them, and their corpses were eaten, while I could only sit in the castle, unable to do anything. I could only try my best to call my people to the castle to take refuge. Probably because it was too painful to be alone, he didn't hesitate to tell me everything. In the end, they finally attacked all the way to my castle. My people weren't a match for those monsters, and if it continued like that, they would all die here sooner or later. So in the end, I took out the demon's sword that was suppressed in the heart of the tree. Demon's sword? I repeated in a daze. There were also demon swords in the human kingdoms, but they were basically magic weapons like swords with magic. That's right, demon's sword. It's a weapon with terrifying power, and at the same time, it can bewitch people. The expression on his face became somewhat fanatical, and he slowly said, Once you hold the hilt, once you unsheath it, once you start using it, you can't stop. Slash, cut and cut. It's a demon sword that won't stop until all living things are killed. I thought of the corpses below. Almost all of them were killed in one hit, and there was no trace of resistance or fighting. If it was all because of that sword, then it was indeed a terrifying weapon that could be called a demon sword. By the time I woke up, it was already too late. My enemies, my people, my wife, and my children had all died in my hands. This is the demon sword. I should have realized it earlier. I should have realized it the moment I held it. Even if I had to risk my life to lead my people out of the encirclement, it would have been better than living like this. He became hysterical. It seemed that killing his own people, wife, and children with his own hands was a big blow to him. It's all this world's fault. It's all because of this damned world, those damned Demon King's army. Everything has fallen to this point. He laughed crazily. So, let this world, for my people, for Talisa and Mimi. What do you want to do? I couldn't help but ask. The Celestial Empire is a space that floats outside of Auravia, but it itself is unstable. My ancestors once designed the world's greatest weapon for us weak fairies. His gaze fell on the marble statue behind him. As long as the key is used to open the lock, this spatial formation will be activated. The entire Celestial Empire will be guided by the key to transform into a sharp sword, piercing into the world of Auravia. That damned world will be destroyed. Obviously, that demon sword was the so-called key. Moreover, this suicidal attack would undoubtedly cause the Celestial Empire to collapse completely. Usually, rather than calling this a weapon of war, it was more like a nuclear weapon on Earth. When it wasn't used, it was the most intimidating. Once it was used, everyone would die together with it, returning to the Stone Age to play with mud. You're crazy. That was the only comment I could make. That's fine. Before the world is destroyed, let's do a final warm-up. He let go of the sword hilt and slowly walked towards me. I immediately unsheathed the chipped sword in its scabbard, as if facing a great enemy, and assumed the most standard fighting stance. Do you intend to fight me barehanded without a weapon? I tried my best to disrupt his rhythm with my words. Who do you think I am? My opponent didn't care at all. With a casual punch, I felt as if I had been hit by an oncoming car from several meters away. My entire body hurt, and I was sent flying, crashing into the wooden wall behind me. The impact was so great that I felt as if all the air in my lungs had been squeezed out. Was that punch just now a wind magic spell? There was no chanting, no incantation, and I didn't even see the slightest sign of a spell, yet I was hit. The difference in strength was so great that it made me despair. However, now wasn't the time to give up. I touched my chest, and after confirming that my broken ribs hadn't pierced into my organs, I stood up shakily and raised my sword at my opponent. The pride of a swordsman? Humph. The corner of my opponent's mouth twitched slightly, and then he stretched out his hand, and a lightsaber like that of Jedi Knight appeared in his hand. It seemed that he intended to use my best swordsmanship to defeat me. Although I have heard of this kind of subtle and somewhat paranoid guy, it was actually the first time I had seen one. Maybe it was because the other party was crazy. But in this way, I had a little chance of winning. At that time, I was too weak. If the other party had kept a distance and used magic to fight with me, I would have been blasted out after dodging 1 or 2 magic spells, although I was seriously injured. In order to pursue that small chance of winning, I didn't hesitate much. I dragged my seriously injured body and slashed at the other party first. Unlike the swords in the Celestial Empire, the two-handed swords in the mercenary group were basically slashing. In fact, the usage was more similar to the sword in the Celestial Empire. When the Fairy Empress saw my clumsy attack, the contempt in her eyes became heavier. She simply leaned sideways and then cut along the blade of my sword. If I didn't change my move, my finger would have been cut off before my sword could cut her. However, her response was exactly what I wanted. As I said before, the only swordsmanship I knew at that time was called Jackdaw Counterattack. The reason why I learned this swordsmanship was mainly because it looked cool and was indeed very practical. From the name, it could be seen that this was a kind of swordsmanship after the other party attacked, taking advantage of the opportunity to slide the attack and counterattack. It was elegant and even gave people the feeling that the user could predict the future. In fact, this move was very strict in the prediction of the enemy's attack route and the opponent's change of move. In theory, only experienced veterans could learn it. Therefore, when I learned this move, the leader found it incredible and thought that I was quite talented in swordsmanship. At the same time that the Fairy Empress made that move, I immediately used Jackdaw Counterattack, intending to use the sword to twist the other party's lightsaber. As a result, my long sword was melted by the lightsaber. However, this was more or less within my expectations. Almost at the same time, I immediately stretched out my right hand, grabbed the tip of the melted old iron sword, and stabbed towards the other party's heart. But it was also deflected by the other party's elbow. It was just that my third wave of attack had arrived. The remaining half of the sword directly shook and flipped over because of excessive force. I also took advantage of the situation, raised the hilt, and directly smashed it towards the other party's temple. His right hand was still holding the lightsaber, and his left hand had just made an elbow strike. In theory, there was no way to block my attack. But this was only in theory after all. When the enemy was a mage, theory was not so reliable. Almost in the blink of an eye, the other party withdrew his lightsaber. Although he could also try to stab me with his lightsaber, he would also be hit by the hilt of my sword. Whether he would be injured or not, he would definitely be dizzy for a moment. For a swordsman, that moment was enough for me to stab the broken sword into his head again. Then, he kept his right hand slightly above his abdomen and opened his palm towards me. The next moment, I was blown away by a wind bullet similar to the one before. Cough. This time, because the distance was too close, I flew farther than last time and finally hit the stone platform heavily. At that moment, I almost felt like I was going to die. A wind bullet at a very close distance, even if it did not stir up my internal organs, it could still cause internal bleeding. Without a priest to heal me in time, it was basically no different from a death sentence. Probably because he could not defeat me with only the swordsman part, the Fairy Empress stood there motionless, but the expression on her face kept changing. But it didn't matter because my goal had been achieved. I used the last of my strength to climb onto the stone platform. What are you doing? The Fairy Empress's voice came from behind me. She was probably already trying to pull me away from here with magic transmission or something like that. But I had to be faster. I just held the hilt of the magic sword with both hands. The next moment, the world seemed to have stopped. I don't know how to describe that feeling, but there seemed to be a lot of images flashing around me. In the next moment, I suddenly understood. It was a prophecy. When I held the hilt of the magic sword made a prophecy about my future. I will kill everything in this world. Whether I like it or I hate it, whether it is an acquaintance or a stranger, whether it is a man or a woman, old or young. In the end, they will all die under my sword. Whether it is the princess or Gove. Everything I cherish, everything I want to protect, will be destroyed by my own hands. At the end of everything, I will also destroy the world like that crazy fairy. I will be like a puppet, step by step, irrevocably towards the predetermined end. Chapter 473. Do you mean that your future had already been decided back then? Ing asked. Is that how you see it? I guess I'm not very good at telling stories. Su Xinqing shook his head regretfully. Do you have tea here? I'm a bit thirsty from telling it. If you're talking about the kind of drink made from the corpses of plants, I'm sorry, I don't have any. Ing paused and asked hesitantly, is water that contains a lot of magic elements okay? I remember that in the world where I collected water, people called this water the one heavenly water. It seems to be very precious. Is that really okay? Let me say this first. I don't have the money to pay you. Su Xinqing said hesitantly. It's okay, I took a lot from that world. The girl smiled slightly. Oh, how much did you take? About 5 million tons. You must have taken away all the one heavenly primordial water in that world. Su Xinqing felt as if he could see the appearance of the self-cultivators in that world crying after losing their treasures. Ing brewed a pot of one heavenly water for Su Xinqing and then brought out a plate of tea for Mo Li, who seemed to be a bit impatient. As for the crystal ball crab that was foaming at the mouth, it was nowhere to be seen. Ing probably took it back into her old leather suitcase. After doing all this, the girl sat up straight again and waited for Su Xinqing to continue. Actually, you don't have to be so formal. Su Xinqing drank the so-called one heavenly water and stuck out his tongue. He felt that it wasn't as good as Song Yu's tea. It's getting late. My story is about to come to an end. When I held the demon's sword and saw the prophecies, I hesitated for less than a second before pulling it out. Humans always have this kind of wishful thinking, and I'm not immune to it. What if the prophecies were wrong? Moreover, at that time, if I didn't use the power of the demon's sword, I wouldn't have been a match for the fairy empress. Maybe I would have been killed in the next blow. I really didn't have the luxury to choose. However, the moment I pulled out the magic sword, the world seemed to distort in my eyes. It was hard for me to describe that feeling. It was as if I had mixed rotten meat, the organs of living creatures, and disgusting red mucus together and smeared it all over the world. After my fear subsided, I could feel that the entire world seemed to harbor deep malice towards me. It was as if a foul stench filled my nose, as if something sticky and rotten filled my vision, and as if a pool of stagnant water was crawling around my ears. A sense of disgust towards the entire world rose from the bottom of my heart. Everything was dirty and filthy. Irritated emotions filled my heart. Even my thoughts, which were originally blurry due to my heavy injuries, began to become violent. I couldn't help but want to tear everything I saw and heard into pieces. The first to suffer was naturally the fairy empress who was closest to me. Even now, I don't know how miserable the fairy empress' death was. After all, at that time, I had almost completely lost my mind. I could only vaguely see a repulsive monster roaring as it pounced at me. But, at that time, I had already obtained the power of my magic sword. The monster's movements seemed to me as if they were being played in slow motion 64 times the normal speed. As the madness gradually calmed down, I could see the wriggling shape of every piece of flesh as it pounced at me, the trajectory it slowly drew in the air, and even the green mucus oozing out of its body. Everything was so clear and distinct. Almost instinctively, I swung my sword and cut off the monster's head. But because it was a monster that didn't have a fixed shape, I wasn't sure if it would still be alive after its head was cut off. So I cut off every piece of flesh from its body. After easily chopping up the filth in front of me, I began to move. Although my berserk madness had stabilized, that state of sober madness could still be seen as a form of delirium. At that time, I had spent most of my time in a half-awake state. However, my desire to save Gove, perhaps it was an obsession. At any rate, this thought still drove me towards the serious tree as quickly as possible. It was worth mentioning that even with the help of the dragon, it took me nearly 2 hours to rush from the serious tree to the castle of trees. But with the demon sword, even if I ran on my own feet, it only took me a very short time to return to the serious tree. But the situation didn't get better because of the passage of time. Instead, it got worse. My body, which was already on the verge of exhaustion, was constantly recovering and even becoming stronger. But the mental torture was pushing me to the brink of collapse. The twisted and horrifying things around me were wearing away at my sanity. The sky was a strange dark red, and it was filled with blood-red holes that looked like eyes. The soft ground, which should have been covered with fragrant grass, had become as soft and sticky as a creature's internal organs. The air was filled with a nauseating stench, and there was not a single normal creature in sight. There were creatures that were even more disgusting than monsters like the butcher. An uncontrollable desire kept gnawing at my heart. It made me take out the demon sword and punish the entire world. And the feeling of holding the strongest power in the world in my hand clearly told me that if I really did it, I could definitely do it. It took almost all of my wits to resist the temptation of this manic impulse. I ran to the place where the serious tree was. There were 2 distorted monsters whose faces couldn't be seen fighting. I raised my hand and swung my sword at them. The bigger one was instantly killed by me with a raise of my hand, but the smaller one was lucky enough to survive my slash. I didn't know if it was because I hadn't fully grasped the power of the demon sword, or because I vaguely felt something at that time, so I didn't really kill the smaller monster. But even so, the smaller one seemed to have suffered a considerable amount of damage in the battle just now. It was very weak. I was afraid that even if I left it alone, it wouldn't be able to live for long. Just as I was about to kill it with the thought of ending its suffering, I noticed something wrong. After the monster saw that I was the one who attacked it, it didn't dodge my sword. On the back of this distorted, meaty monster, there was a white hairband tied to its tentacle-like organ. That was the hairband I personally tied on Gubby's hair. So, my sword didn't land on the monster's body. Instead, I ruthlessly stabbed my left palm. The tip of the sword pierced through my entire palm. To be honest, it was so painful that I almost cried. But it was this kind of heart-piercing pain that cleared my mind and freed me from the illusion. The dark red that covered my entire field of vision quickly receded like the tide. As expected, the monster in front of me wasn't a meaty monster, but Govey. At this time, the girl's right arm was broken at the elbow. The wound seemed to have been burned by the high temperature, and it was in a charred state. I didn't know if she did this to stop the bleeding, or if it was purely an injury she received during the battle. Her elven dress was also dyed red with her own blood. Other than her right arm, there were several wounds on her body. Her originally rosy little face was now extremely pale due to excessive blood loss. Her legs had begun to wither from the tips of her toes, and the withering continued to spread upward. I could feel the girl's life burning like firewood and then turning into magic power. This was probably the price she had to pay for stalling the butcher. Even if I didn't have any medical knowledge, I could tell that the girl seemed to be on the verge of death. I threw away my magic sword and pulled her into my arms. I wanted to use my pitiful knowledge of first aid on Earth to save her. But unfortunately, I found that I didn't know where to start. I knew you would rush back before the end. She used her remaining left hand of her 4 limbs to gently touch my face. I could feel her life slowly fading away. Bit by bit, irrevocably. Don't talk. I will bring you back to the mercenary group's encampment to find a priest to heal you, I said. The girl shook her head. Actually, I am very timid. The more battles I have experienced, the more afraid I am of battles. Because every time I see life fading away, I feel that life is so fragile. So, when there are more and more important things in my heart, I become more and more afraid of death, afraid of losing those important things. She gasped for breath. Her weak state made it impossible for her to finish too many words in one breath. But when there is something far more important than those things in the past, I suddenly realize that even if it is just to protect that thing, I will be filled with the courage to fight. Sue, you are my courage. Don't say any more. Don't worry, nothing will happen. I felt that my voice was choked up. No matter how strong the magic sword was, it couldn't save the girl in my arms. Yes, I believe in you. Her voice became even softer and weaker. If it is you, you will definitely be able to save the world. To everyone, saving is irreplaceable, the most important thing. Because there was no follow-up. The girl stopped breathing in my arms. That pair of beautiful emerald eyes became cloudy. Her beautiful face no longer had that cheerful, lively, and charming smile. Her yellow-green hair also lost its former luster. I couldn't even properly braid her hair once. From that moment on, I carried the first promise. No matter what, I will do my best to save the world. Do you love her? Ing secretly piqued at Su Xinqing's expression. However, old Su maintained a poker face as he drank the heavenly treasures that she got from God knows where. There wasn't a hint of sadness or joy on his face. Emoli quietly hid the snacks in his storage space, as if he was planning to eat them later. If you had asked me back then, I would have probably thought that I loved her. But now, I can clearly tell you that I only like her, but I don't love her. Su Xinqing put down the teacup and slowly said, because only after experiencing it can you truly understand that love isn't such a cheap word. Is that so? Ing tilted her head. She, who was born as a cancer of the world, didn't really understand the word love. However, what was interesting was that in many different worlds, intelligent creatures seemed to have similar feelings. Even those that didn't need to reproduce, such as the hermaphrodite Lux race, were the same. That was why she asked out of curiosity. Yes. Su Xinqing replied decisively. There isn't much left to the story, so I'll make it short and tell you all at once. After burying Go Wei under the Sirius tree, I took the demon's sword to the battlefield. I don't know if it was because Go Wei's death was too much of a shock to me, but the demon's sword's bewitching power didn't affect me anymore. At that time, I stubbornly thought that my heart was already dead, so the demon's sword couldn't affect the relationship between inanimate objects. But now that I think about it, it was very likely that my hero's power had already awakened at that time and had already surpassed the power of the demon sword, so its influence was completely wiped out. When I arrived at the battlefield, the Battle of Dawn had already reached its climax. The battlefield unavoidably expanded. Because Her Royal Highness had turned the feint into a real war, the human kingdoms had no choice but to invest more forces to prevent the Demon King's army from swarming in and directly devouring the last human territory after the army was defeated. At that time, the human race would truly be wiped out. I don't know the situation in the early stages of the Battle of Dawn, but I think that there were definitely many heroes who stood up under the leadership of the princess and fought for the future of the human race. It was the first time that the Demon King's army couldn't take down the human resistance for a long time, so they thought that it was because of the princess who led the resistance. Thus, they used a method similar to besieging the reinforcements and set up an encirclement. Then, they attacked where the princess had to lead the resistance's main force into the encirclement. Even if it was an encirclement, the Demon King's army would have to expend a lot of manpower to eliminate so many of the humans' forces. Thus, they chose a more simple and crude method. They set up a powerful magic formation around the encirclement. The magic formation itself was a one-time use item, but the power it released was close to that of a forbidden spell. Even the high-ranking officers of the Demon King's army in Auravia would have to retreat in the face of this level of power, let alone mere humans. Thus, Even if the princess discovered that something was wrong and wanted to lead her subordinates to escape, as long as they couldn't break through the encirclement in a short period of time, it would be futile. Of course, this was what I learned from the staff officers after the war. In short, I just happened to arrive at the encirclement when the main force of the human resistance was about to be wiped out by the forbidden spell. When I appeared, I slashed the forbidden spell with my sword, causing it to bounce into the Demon King's army formation, causing great damage to the Demon King's army. Although I sounded like I was blowing my own trumpet, the fact that I blocked that attack was probably like a divine soldier descending from the sky in the eyes of the human resistance army. Their morale was instantly boosted to an explosive level. The princess, who saw the opportunity, immediately led the army to break through the encirclement and successfully escaped from the enemy's encirclement. After that, I told the princess a little about what had happened and joined the human resistance. As the vanguard, I caused considerable damage to the Demon King's army in several battles. In addition, I don't know if it was the princess who deliberately promoted my identity as a hero, but it made me even more popular among the human survivors. Gradually, some unique fellows began to gather around me. Finally, we formed a strange little team. This is a matter for the future, so let's not talk about it for now. Just like that, with the Battle of Dawn as a turning point, the humans began to gradually recover their lost land. The Demon King's army, which was originally regarded as invincible, was defeated again and again, and the myth of invincibility collapsed. Thus, the other races who had lost their homes gradually united under the banner of the humans and fought against the Demon King's army together. No matter what, the humans were the natives of Auravia. Even if they had some disagreements with other races in the past, that was Auravia's own matter. Compared to the invasion of the Demon King's army, that was just a small matter. It was like two brothers fighting over a house. Of course, they would first kill the outsider who wanted to snatch the house. As for my magic sword, after I used it to kill thousands of Demon King's army monsters, people selectively forgot its original name and began to call it the Sacred Sword. Shining Sacred Sword, Herakti. At the same time, it was the first sacred sword I owned. From then on, I vaguely understood the nature of prophecies. After that, as I walked further and further down the path of the future, I received many prophecies in various forms more than once. Many prophecies even said that I would destroy the world. Alright, I admit that I have had similar experiences. But more than 90% of them didn't come true because I wouldn't sit and wait for the prophecies to come. Instead, I would use my own actions to surpass the prophecies. That's pretty much all I wanted to say. After drinking the water in one gulp, Su Xinqing put the cup back on the table. If there are no other questions, I'll be leaving first. Emily, let's go. On the other side, Lux, who had been on standby for 4 chapters, was also getting impatient. Maybe if he waited any longer, he would have mitosis. Mr. Su, will you be able to surpass the prophecies this time? Isn't this a completely different situation? Ing was still a bit worried and asked. As expected, I didn't make it clear enough? Su Xinqing, who had walked to the exit, stopped and caused Emily, who was following behind him, to bump into his waist. Then, Su Xinqing turned around and said with a grin, "It's not about whether or not I can surpass the prophecies, but I will definitely save all of the worlds. This is how I, Su Xinqing, live." Chapter 474. The sun shone on the streets. Although it was a bit hot because it was midsummer, the tall trees on both sides of the road still provided a cool shade. Sure enough, ordinary daily life was the best. Walking on the street, Chintua, who was carrying a plastic bag, once again confirmed his thoughts. He had just bought something at the convenience store and was about to return to the dormitory. Because of the Emperor's sword, he didn't live in the school dormitory. Instead, he lived in an apartment outside the school that was funded by the super administrator and Ding Yang. After getting used to life in the big city, even he had to admit that compared to his hometown where he had to walk for 2 hours just to buy a Coke, life in the city was indeed more convenient. Hey, since there's still time, how about we go to the dessert shop on the corner and buy a limited edition caramel pudding? The Emperor's sword spirit floated next to him and begged him, "I want to eat that." Because he felt a bit retarded talking to himself on the road, Chintua thought about it and decided to pretend that he didn't hear it. Master? Hey, can you hear me? The sword spirit floated in front of him, trying to get his attention. But he ignored it with his half-open dead fish eyes. Not good. Could it be that Master doesn't have enough spiritual power in his body, so he can't see me? So the sword spirit turned pale with fright and said, "Oh, now that things have come to this, we can only ask Yuan Rong's master for help. Ku, although I don't want to lower my head to Yuan Rong, but for my beloved master, I can only put down my pride at this time." Wang Lai acknowledges, Wang Lai allows, Wang Lai carries the entire world. As she said that, she wanted to float towards the police station, but Chintua quickly grabbed her ponytail, causing her to lean back involuntarily. The expression on her face also became, "Don't casually copy other people's lines, okay? Oh, master, you country bumpkin actually saw that before. Wait, can't you see me now? Why did you ignore me just now? You actually pretended not to hear me again. Kumu, it seems that I have been too lenient with Master, causing you to become so arrogant and frivolous. I will punish you." KFC seems to have a new dish. Really? That's great. Master, I want to eat it. Buy it for me. But I refused. Overboard, have you forgotten who it was that helped you pass the exam? Why are you so relaxed during the holidays? It's all thanks to the teacher's serious guidance and my diligent study. That serious look is not funny at all. Master, you were able to pass the exam because I helped you cheat. Unseemly, really unseemly. The sword spirit of the Son of Heaven's sword was making a fuss at the side. However, she was right. If it wasn't for the Son of Heaven's sword helping Chintuma cheat, Earthchild probably wouldn't be so relaxed now. Instead, he would have to endure the scorching summer to run to school for tutoring and makeup exams this time. From this point of view, he really had to thank this noisy fellow a little. But then again, you can't eat it all, right? Chuntoa hit the nail on the head and pointed out the problem. Even if I really bought you caramel pudding, you wouldn't be able to touch it, right? To be precise, the caramel pudding would pass through the spirit body, so it couldn't do something as difficult as eating. I have already thought of a way to solve this problem. The sword spirit of the Son of Heaven's sword puffed out her chest and showed a proud expression for some reason, as long as Master feeds me. The kind of feeding mouth to mouth, even I would feel awkward. Who said I want to feed mouth to mouth? Immoral, really immoral. This time, even the sword spirit of the Son of Heaven's sword blushed. God knows what the reason was. Use your fingers to feed me. Then you can taste it? Chintoa asked casually. Probably. The shy expression disappeared from the stupid sword spirit's face at the speed of light, and she said with that strange, proud attitude again. Just probably. Chintoa immediately lost interest. All right, since you have indeed helped me a lot, I'll buy you a mere caramel pudding. His straightforward attitude stunned the sword spirit of the Son of Heaven's sword. What's wrong? Didn't you say you wanted to eat it? Chintoa asked strangely. Strange. In the past, Master, after teasing me, shouldn't you still insist on not buying anything and make me sad all the way home? The sword spirit's reaction made Chintoa ask himself, was I really that overboard in the past? But there was no other way, right? In the past, he had always stayed in his hometown in the countryside. When he first came to the big city, he was really shocked by the prices here. Furthermore, the Son of Heaven's sword's taste was surprisingly high. Most of the things it liked were extremely expensive. Of course, he could not bear to buy them, luckily. He was more or less used to life in the city now. He had saved up quite a bit of living expenses from Ding Yang and the super administrator. Even if he sent a large portion of it back home, he still had some spare money on hand. Thus, it was fine to slightly satisfy the Son of Heaven's sword's request. I know. A demon like you must be pretending to agree and only go back on your word when we reach the door of the dessert house. You want to see our disappointment, right? As expected. Forget it. To hell with the apology. Just as Chun Tua rolled his eyes and planned to change his route back to the dormitory to completely cut off the Son of Heaven's sword's thoughts about pudding, the advertisement on the huge LCD screen outside the building opposite the sidewalk changed to something like social news. Chun Tua subconsciously looked over and found that the current news was popular singer Su Wei, known as the Little Queen of the music industry, is about to visit Jiangjin City and hold a solo concert. From the time displayed, this news should have been released this morning. A woman wearing large sunglasses that covered most of her face waved her hand in the direction of the camera on the screen. Then, surrounded by bodyguards, she slowly walked into a plane. Oh. The sword spirit's attention was also attracted by this news. She could not help but exclaim, "This actress's singing is very good. If this was still in my era, I would definitely kidnap her, invite her into the palace to play music for me." "Do you know her?" Chun Tua asked in boredom. This time, it was the sword spirit's turn to be silent. Even so, Chun Tua could still see the meaning in the girl's bright eyes. "You don't even know her? You're really a country bumpkin, master. She's just a singer. Is it so strange that I don't know her?" Chun Tua muttered softly and walked forward silently, with his head lowered. He could vaguely hear many passers-by talking about this matter. It seemed that the star was indeed very famous and popular. Just as he was hesitating about whether to take a shortcut back to the dormitory, a figure suddenly dashed out of the alley and slammed into him. Fortunately, after becoming the wielder of the Son of Heaven's sword, Chun Tua's physique had improved considerably. Although he did not break through the limits of humans, he was at least considered one of the best among humans. He only took half a step back to stabilize himself. On the other hand, the person who dashed out of the alley fell to the ground because of the reaction force. And after the collision, the mask and sunglasses on her face had also fallen off. "Wow, master, you're really..." After the sword spirit saw the other person's appearance, he could not help but sigh. This physique that involuntarily gets involved in trouble is really too similar to the ancient emperor. The person who knocked down Chun Tua was the popular star Su Wei that was on the news just now. Chun Tua thought for a while and decided to pretend that he did not know her to avoid this trouble. Song Yu was originally in a rather good mood today, because a certain someone along with a lowly, who had been missing for 2 days, had finally returned. Although she was not sure what Su Xinxing meant when he said, "We're going to save the multiverse," this did not stop the girl from feeling happy because of the return of her sweetheart. This kind of joy from the bottom of her heart even made the girl feel radiant. So much so that when she went to buy groceries, the aunties and uncles that she was familiar with who sold groceries all knew that she was in a good mood. Unfortunately, this good mood didn't last for long, because she received a phone call. The person on the other end of the phone claimed to be Su Wei's manager and told her that the recently popular star was coming to visit her. What kind of situation was this? The girl felt that if she took out a mirror and looked at herself, she would definitely find that she had a confused expression in the mirror. After a certain man with a slightly strange hairline helped her to withdraw from the entertainment industry, Song Yu did not continue to pay attention to the entertainment industry. Therefore, although Su Wei had recently become very popular, Song Yu did not particularly understand her. If it had to be said, it was when Song Yu, with the help of the Mirage Pearl, caused quite a stir in the country. She was once praised by some musicians as the person most likely to become the next little diva. At that time, Su Wei was under the shadow of her halo. It was not until Song Yu withdrew from the entertainment industry that Su Wei replaced Song Yu and became the most popular singer in the recent period. Sure enough, it's better to discuss it with Xinxing, the girl sighed. Because she was afraid that it was a problem left behind by the Mirage Pearl, she finally decided to look for the most reliable ginseng to discuss the situation in detail. Chapter 475. Are you worried that the influence of the Mirage Pearl hasn't completely disappeared? In Sakura's apartment, after hearing Song Yu's worries, Su Xinxing asked while fiddling with a shiny Mirage Pearl. Just like Song Yu, who didn't care about the entertainment circle. No, to be exact, compared to Song Yu, Su Xinxing's knowledge of current stars was obviously more limited. You couldn't expect a person whose aesthetic sense had been distorted by years of life in a different world to like modern entertainment programs, just like how ancient literati couldn't appreciate heavy metal. Yes. Songyu frowned and nodded slightly. Because I can't think of any other possibility. Even when I was still a star, I didn't have any interaction with that girl called Sue. Maybe she's a former fan of yours, and this time she came purely to relieve the pain of lovesickness. Okay, I'm kidding. Seeing the girl narrowing her eyes and showing an unhappy look, Su Xinxing could only raise his hands and surrender. Otherwise, if the girl got angry, his dinner table might be dominated by Dehay's sweet and sour lithium battery, braised exhaust pipe, and braised motherboard dishes. Regardless of other people's reactions, it was conceivable that Emoli would definitely be unhappy. When this girl was unhappy, she would often choose more violent means to take revenge on society, such as destroying the ball of shame, destroying the Milky Way, destroying the world, and so on. He couldn't possibly allow his own world to be destroyed by Jasmine just a few days ago when he made such a cool statement like, "It's not about whether or not I can surpass the prophecy. It's about whether or not I will definitely save all the worlds, right?" Actually, what I said just now wasn't entirely a joke. He handed the Mirage Pearl back to Songyu. I've checked the Mirage Pearl. There's no problem with it. Although Su Xinxing didn't know much about the monsters on Earth, he didn't think that a cricket, a little monster that had just gained spiritual intelligence not long ago, could hide from his perception. Moreover, it was in a situation where he could use the cloud scale to perceive from a distance. At the same time, old Su didn't think that ordinary people on Earth could easily see through the protection he had given to the Mirage Pearl. In this case, after combining the above clues, he could basically conclude that Sue should have known Songyu, and this time she came to Songyu purely to meet her. As for the reason for the meeting, in fact, if he really wanted to guess, there were as many as he wanted. For example, after Sue reached the peak of her life, she felt that she didn't personally defeat Songyu in the music industry, so she specially came to make up for the peak battle, or the entertainment company behind Sue still had some ideas about the once brilliant Songyu and wanted to try to sign her. Or just like Su Xinxing's guess, she was simply a fanatic fan, dissatisfied with Songyu's sudden tia. She was dissatisfied with Song's why she came to meet her. They it.
So, she, Sue.
S. With. Teat. S. Right. S's. Is that really the case? The girl took the mirage bead and put it back on the bracelet, but she still looked a little skeptical. She thought for a while, and then put her hands together. How about you come with me, Xinxing? With you there, no matter what happens, it shouldn't be a problem, right? Hearing that, Su Xinxing couldn't help but be silent for a while. That was to say, after being exposed to the unusual side of the world, it was easy to get lost in it, and it was difficult to go back to common sense. Just like some soldiers who had participated in a fierce war and were left with the aftereffects of the war, even if they returned to a peaceful country, they would still have an allergic reaction to things like fireworks and firecrackers. Su Xinxing himself had a similar reaction, but after the war in Orovia, he still couldn't return to normal. Whenever he heard a special sound, he would immediately tense up, and the first thought in his mind would be, another unruly person wants to harm me, or something. It took him a few days to adjust. But just as he adjusted, the crack in the Great Devil Realm appeared again, forcing him to take his elite team back to the battlefield. To be honest, Songyu's current behavior wasn't a good sign. So Su Xinxing made a decision after thinking for a while. Songyu. The girl was stunned. It was the first time she heard Su Xinxing call her name so seriously, and her body unconsciously sat up straight. This time, I won't go to your meeting with Sue. Oh, Songyu's small mouth pursed, and she looked a little disappointed. At the same time, the girl was a little worried. Could it be that she always caused trouble for Su Xinxing, so he was impatient with her? Maybe he vaguely saw the girl's worry. Su Xinxing went on as if nothing had happened. Didn't I miss a day when I was working? My boss was very dissatisfied, so I have to work a little overtime these 2 days, so I don't have time to accompany you to meet that person. Is that so? The girl's heart suddenly turned sunny. Really, she's a big star. If the other boys in the school knew about it, they would definitely fight to go. This wasn't a lie. Some time ago, there were students who skipped school to watch the news of Su Wei's concert, and it was also hyped up. Although this kind of overwhelming news and public opinion undoubtedly had a mastermind behind it, it was undeniable that this did indeed make Su Wei's popularity more exuberant. Because I didn't have much interest in this kind of thing before, Su Xinxing sighed. Now that I think about it, it's not bad. That Su Wei is a big beauty. If you take a fancy to her, then wouldn't I have a big enemy on my path of love? The girl said with a smile. Su Xinxing didn't know what to do with this kind of almost undisguised straight ball. Fortunately, at this time, the other people who went out to buy things came back, dispelling his awkwardness. Xiao Su, the human supermarket is so interesting. So, it was like this before it broke. The beast-eared girl ran over with sparkling eyes and said excitedly like a child, "Little Chiketsu, I don't know why he doesn't allow me to eat the things inside." Brother, did Pomeranians really live abroad before? The exhausted little Chiketsu staggered over to Su Xinxing's side, threw his head into Su Xinxing's arms, and said in a muffled voice, "I took her out to play. I'm so tired." Su Xinxing hesitated for a moment, and in the end, he didn't tell the truth that he was walking the dog. Chapter 476. On the other hand, after Chintua realized that he seemed to be entangled in some strange trouble, he immediately planned to ignore it and escape from the scene as soon as possible. However, before he could pretend not to know her and leave, the celebrity had already fallen to the ground. It looked like she had fainted. Chintua couldn't help but twitch his mouth speechlessly. This was not a deserted place. It was just that the weather was too hot, so there weren't many people on the road. However, if he allowed a girl to faint in such a place, it was a small matter if she fell sick. However, if she was caught by some people who were obsessed with her, it would be a little too much. So, Master, what do you plan to do this time? For some reason, the sword spirit of the Son of Heaven's sword looked very excited. A hero saving a beauty? A hero saving a beauty? Hero my ass. Chintua just didn't like trouble. He wasn't cold-blooded. Even he had a certain sense of justice. Otherwise, the Son of Heaven's sword wouldn't have chosen him as its master. Therefore, after thinking for a few seconds, this simple youth from the village made a decision. Of course I'm calling the police now. Yes, this kind of thing should be left to the good friends of the people. It was better for the police to handle it. As a citizen of Chaoyang, calling the police was the best solution. It's not interesting at all. Master, you're too cowardly. Hearing Chintua's words, the sword spirit was instantly discouraged. Can't you do something more interesting and entertain me? I'll drive Minesweeper to entertain you when we get home. That's such an antique way of entertainment. You're an antique yourself. Do you have the right to say that? Just as the Earth Child was arguing with his sword spirit and was about to call the police, the sword spirit of the Son of Heaven's sword, which was noisy, suddenly quieted down. Chintua immediately sensed this change. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "What's wrong?" "I feel a demon aura." The Son of Heaven's sword narrowed its eyes and stared at the fainted celebrity. "It's very faint, but it does exist." Chintua looked at the number of the police on his phone. After a moment of silence, he exited the dialing screen. He opened the phone book as if trying to find a certain number. In the end, after searching for a long time, there was no need to search through the empty contact list. He still couldn't find the number he was looking for. Then he remembered. **CK. I deleted that guy's phone number. Chintua's face instantly turned into an awkward expression. His mobile phone was also sponsored by Ding Yang, and it originally had Ding Yang and Xiao Jingyi's mobile phone numbers. However, after being tricked by Xiao Jingyi once, he didn't want to be involved in that kind of trouble again. He wanted to blacklist the other party's number, but found that this lousy phone didn't have a blacklist function. Therefore, he simply deleted Xiao Jingyi's number and set his phone to reject unknown calls. Obviously, Chintua's memory wasn't good enough for him to remember a phone number that he hadn't deliberately memorized. At a time like this, we can only ask Ding Yang for help. He sighed helplessly, then found Ding Yang's phone number and called him. I'm looking for a paradise overseas. F***CK. All the caves in the country have been developed into tourist attractions. I don't care who you are, just leave a message after the beep. Chintua silently opened Weibo, then found that Ding Yang's last message was, I'm going to Guatemala, bye-bye, from less than half a month ago. The number of reposts and comments were 0, and it looked a little sad. Chintua was silent for a moment, then he liked the other party's post and put away his phone. Originally, since this matter was related to monsters, it would be useless to report to the ordinary police. Moreover, Tuwazi had seen the destructive power of monsters, and if he encountered a lawless one, he didn't know that Jiangjin's lawless monsters were beaten to a pulp. The ordinary police would be in danger. The most reliable person in this situation was naturally the man with slightly thinning hair, but unfortunately, Chintua only met him a few times, and he was almost no different from a stranger, so naturally, he didn't have his contact information. The second choice was Xiao Jingyi, but because of his childish behavior, there was no way to contact him. And as the last insurance, Ding Yang happened to go abroad at this time to find a place to cultivate. Moreover, if he wanted to find an undeveloped paradise, it would most likely be in the mountains, so he couldn't count on it for the time being. At present, the safest way was to take him directly to the Super Administrative Office's office, which was equivalent to throwing the burden to the Super Administrative Office. Chintua lowered his head and looked at the superstar's physique. Su Wei was quite tall, but she was only about 1.7 meters tall. She was slightly shorter than Chintua. Her figure was also very slender, and her legs were long and slender. However, probably because she had been working out consistently, her legs were not as thin as a stick, and there was no excess fat. Her well-proportioned appearance was very beautiful. In fact, there were indeed a lot of Su Wei's fans who had a special liking for her legs. Basically, under all the news related to Su Wei, there were comments like, I can play with these legs for a year, and according to some rumors, there were even people who set up a leg-licking club. It could only be said that the perverted desires of human beings were endless. Anyway, the other party's physique could be considered petite, and with the strong biceps that Tuwazi trained from farming in his hometown, he should be able to carry the other party to the Super Administrative Office's office. That's right, if the other party was just an ordinary woman, he could indeed do so. But the problem was that this fainted Su Wei was currently the most popular superstar. If he was seen carrying this superstar on his back, regardless of the rumors, Tuwazi felt that he would be found out the next day, and then someone might send him razor blades every day without a doubt. This was not in line with Chintua's principle of not getting involved in troublesome matters. It was completely contrary to his principle. Oh right, son of heaven, can you possess her body and control her body? After thinking for a moment, Chintua asked his sword spirit. Ho ho ho, leave this kind of small matter to me. Why can't I possess her? Is there some kind of restriction on this girl's body? Master, what do you mean by that look in your eyes? You as always, are useless in important situations. Goo-woo. Chapter 477. There's no way to possess her. Chintua smacked his lips awkwardly. If the Son of Heaven's sword could possess the girl's body, then it could temporarily replace the girl who had lost her mind to control the body. But in this situation, he could only carry her home. Hopefully, he wouldn't bump into anyone on the way and call the police. Fortunately, perhaps because the weather was really hot, they didn't meet anyone on the way. Plus, this place was not far from Chintua's apartment, so they finally arrived at his current residence safely. The weather in summer was as unpredictable as a child's temper and a woman's thoughts. Not long after Chintua safely returned home, the originally clear sky was covered by dark clouds. Accompanied by the rumbling of thunder, bean-sized raindrops fell pitter-patter. Looking at the window that was completely blocked by the rain, Chintua could only sigh helplessly. He originally wanted the Son of Heaven's sword to look after the big star while he ran to the Super Administrator's office to find Xiao Jingyi to help deal with this matter. But now, this plan was ruined. He didn't think that his small broken umbrella, which was less than 5 yuan, could block this kind of downpour. Fortunately, Earthchild's personality was somewhat adaptable. Even if something unexpected happened, he didn't spend his energy on irritability and anger. Instead, he began to cook the instant noodles he bought from the convenience store. My caramel pudding. You're still thinking about that? Of course. I'm the son of heaven. Do you understand that I'm a man of my word? Don't ignore me. Do you want some pickled cabbage noodles? I don't want to eat this kind of thing. And I can't eat it either. Well, I don't plan to feed you. I'm just asking out of courtesy. Chen Tua looked absent-mindedly at the milk pot and said, Indeed, boys of his age had a bigger appetite. A packet of instant noodles was only 80% full. If he gave the son of heaven's sword some more, then he would have to go hungry in the afternoon. Seriously, master, do you really know what courtesy means? In ancient times, when you attack other countries, you first have to make a statement saying that the other party has done something wrong and that you are on your side. Then you roll up your sleeves and attack them? Although I keep feeling that something is off, I actually have nothing to say. Just when the master and servant were having their daily interaction, a clang sound came from the entrance. It sounded like the door had been closed. The sword spirit of the son of heaven's sword immediately passed through the wall. A moment later, her head popped out from the counter beside the natural gas stove. Su Wei escaped. Oh. Chen Tua thought for a while and then added an egg to his noodles. Isn't your reaction a little too cold? The son of heaven's sword said in disappointment. She's a girl. Who knows what will happen if she runs around in such a heavy rain? But according to what you said, isn't she related to monsters? This kind of person wouldn't catch a cold or pneumonia just because they got caught in the rain, right? Chen Tua continued. In fact, even he was the same. After becoming the wielder of the son of heaven's sword, he didn't even catch a cold, let alone a headache or a fever. It caused him to not even be able to apply for sick leave. It was really too painful. That's the situation of being related to monsters. But Su Wei is different. The demonic aura on her body isn't emitted from her body. It's more like she accidentally came into contact with it. In this situation, her body will become even weaker because of the demonic aura, let alone increase her physical fitness. The sword spirit of the son of heaven's sword immediately corrected him. When she said this, Chen Tua also thought of some things that didn't seem right. Back then, when the superstar bumped into him, she didn't use much strength, but even so, she still fainted. This indeed showed that her body's condition was very worrying. If this situation was really caused by the demonic aura, the weak girl probably wouldn't be able to last long in this terrible weather where even the city management wouldn't go out. Thinking of this, Chen Tua sighed again. He felt that if he continued to be involved in these strange things, he would definitely get gastric ulcers from the pressure.
Oh.
Master, are you really planning to go out and bring Su Wei back? Seeing Chen Tua turn off the gas stove and cover the pot of half-finished instant noodles with the lid, the son of heaven's sword spirit immediately cheered. No, I'm just planning to buy a ham sausage to put in the noodles. As Chen Tua said this, he changed his shoes again and took out 2 umbrellas from the cupboard. When he opened the door, the rainstorm outside rushed into the room, causing Chen Tua, who hadn't opened the umbrella, to become a drowned rat. Not good. Going out in this situation was no different from jumping into a river and swimming back and forth. Umbrellas were completely useless, although he grumbled in his heart. He still gritted his teeth and rushed into the rain. The visibility in the rainstorm was very low. Ordinary people could only see about 2 to 3 meters around themselves. This was the same for Chen Tua. After all, the son of heaven's sword only strengthened his body's physique. It didn't help his eyes much. At most, it cured the slight astigmatism left by hiding in bed with a flashlight and reading wuxia novels when he was young. However, just because he couldn't do it didn't mean that the son of heaven's sword couldn't do it. That's right. Although the son of heaven's sword's range of vision was almost the same as Chen Tua's, she still had other senses to help her. In this terrifying rain, the celebrity definitely couldn't have gone far. In that case, All he had to do was try his best to sense the demonic aura on her body. Therefore, under the guidance of the sword spirit, Chintoa found the celebrity curled up next to a trash can in an alley, hugging her knees and shivering. Compared to outside, although the rain in the alley wasn't light, it was still better. Seeing this, Chintoa handed over an umbrella that was useless outside and blocked some of the rain for her. As expected, the other party felt something. She carefully raised her head. When she saw Chintoa, her body subconsciously shrank back. However, behind her was the wall, so she couldn't shrink much. "Who are you?" the celebrity asked softly. However, the voice was surprisingly not completely covered by the surrounding rain. Chintoa could still clearly hear the other party's voice. This made him realize that I've heard this voice sing before. At the same time, he also understood that the other party seemed to be very wary of him. However, this didn't matter. If the two of them were in the same position, Chintoa felt that he wouldn't be much better than the other party. Therefore, he cleared his throat and spoke loudly. "I'm just a passerby." Chapter 478. Although the words of the bystanders were not convincing, the girl did not seem to have any intention of running away. She just hung her head and continued to hug her knees. The rain streaked across her perfect cheeks and finally dripped down from her chin to her collarbone. Her long hair, which seemed to have special effects, was now completely soaked. It was stuck in clumps and dragged on the ground. Her clothes were completely soaked, but because the fabric was of a dark color, she didn't show any signs of malfunction. Chintoa's gaze fell on the girl's sandal-clad ankle. If this was an urban novel, it would probably start describing how perfect the girl's feet were and how the reader couldn't help but be fascinated by them. However, Chintoa was obviously different from the main characters who paid attention to strange things. He was not a foot fetishist, so he quickly noticed that the girl's ankle was a little red and swollen. It seemed that she had sprained it. No wonder she stopped after running for such a short distance. It was so swollen that she probably couldn't even walk properly. He just didn't know if she sprained it when she bumped into him, or if she sprained it when she was running away. "Can you walk on your own?" Chintoa pretended not to hear anything and asked the girl. "Shouldn't you just carry me like a domineering CEO?" Amidst the sword spirit's complaints, Chintoa pretended not to hear anything and asked the girl, "Aren't you in cahoots with those things to catch me?" Hearing his question, the other party raised his head and revealed a surprised expression. At this moment, Chintoa's nature of being afraid of trouble almost made him turn around and leave. However, after hesitating for a moment, he shook his head. Then, Chintoa briefly told the superstar about how he met the girl. Although this did not make the superstar completely let down her guard against Chintoa, it was much better than her attitude of being like a little hedgehog and full of sharp hostility. "Is that so? You don't know me? Sue, right? After all, you seem to be very famous recently. As long as you haven't completely lost touch with society, you should have heard of your name. Although I'm not very sensitive in this aspect, I'm not that otaku. I've heard of you before." Chintoa spoke bluntly. Far away on the other side of the city, a certain Sue, who was cleaning a snack bar in Shaxian, sneezed. Before Song Yu went to find him, he really didn't know what kind of person Sue was. "Yes, being able to reach this point with my own strength is something I am most proud of, but..." The girl showed a proud expression at first, but she soon bit her lip and stopped talking. "Well, if you want to reminisce about the past, I'm not against that." Chintoa half opened his dead fish eyes and looked at the umbrella that was starting to leak. "But if it's possible, I'd like to sit in a dry and quiet room and listen to your stories. Or are you a performance artist? Do you like to express your loneliness in the rain?" Chintoa couldn't help but complain when he saw that the girl wasn't moving at all. That's usually the behavior of a chinibyu or hipster, right? The sword spirit of the son of heaven's sword floating beside him was the least affected by the weather. At this time, it still had the mind to correct Chintoa's wording. But of course, it was ignored by Chintoa again. A faint blush appeared on the girl's face. "I don't think I can stand up, Chintoa. Considering the problem of body contact, Earthchild ignored the sword spirit's clamor to carry Sue on his back. He simply supported Sue, intending to take her home. But soon, Chintua, who had no experience in this area, found that supporting her was even more painful than carrying her. If he carried her on his back, at least he didn't have to see her face. But if he supported her, her face would be right in front of his. It was so awkward that he wanted to explode. Helplessly, he could only change his position and carry her home. At this moment, he couldn't feel the wonderful touch, the heartbeat, or the warm fragrance that was described in novels when carrying a girl on his back. All he felt was that his clothes were wet, and he felt uncomfortable as if he was carrying a warm sponge on his back. The girl's long hair added to this strange illusion of being entangled by seaweed, making Chuntua's movements more difficult. Chuntua was exhausted both physically and mentally by the time he carried her back to his house. "Master, you can't do it." The son of Heaven's sword was still shaking its head and taking the opportunity to complain about its master. "You're too frustrating. As my master, she's just a woman. There's no need to be so embarrassed." "Nonsense, I'm blushing because I've been holding it in," Chuntua muttered in his heart. By the way, the celebrity had borrowed Chuntua's bathroom and was taking a bath to warm up her body. After all, her body was soaked. If she accidentally caught a cold, it might cause a cold. Speaking of which, I don't have women's clothes at home. After catching his breath, Chuntua was distressed. Her clothes were soaked. She couldn't dry them in a short period of time. And Chuntua lived alone. Well, there was also the son of Heaven's sword spirit living with him. However, the son of Heaven's sword was a spirit, so it didn't need to wear clothes. Even if she occasionally wanted to change clothes, it was basically just a thought in her head. Then, with a xiao, the clothes on her body would become what she wanted. It was very cheap. "Master, are you an idiot? Isn't this kind of problem super easy to solve?" The son of Heaven's sword spirit looked as if she had a card up her sleeve. Well, although she was just an existence similar to a vengeful spirit, she was still a girl after all. Maybe she had some good ideas in this regard. Therefore, Chuntua looked as if he was all ears. "At this time, of course, I have to take advantage of the situation and make her wear a nude apron." Very good. It seemed that he didn't need to consider this fellow's opinion for the rest of his life. Chuntua thought for a moment and finally looked at the rain that seemed to have started to lessen. "Why don't I rush out and buy a set now? But what if I buy the wrong size? And other things aside, women also have underwear, right? Could it be that a man like him would rush into a women's underwear store and blindly buy underwear for the other party? He would be treated as a pervert, okay? At this time, I can only rely on external help." He sighed and took out his phone. Thank goodness, the rainstorm just now didn't cause his phone to get wet. Then, he found a number that he thought he would never use in his life in his contacts. Chapter 479. Cui Yingying sat on her bed and sighed helplessly. Compared to when she first moved to Jiangjin, her room was much more feminine. The main color of the room was light pink. The floor was covered with a plush carpet that did not match the season. There were cute patterns on the sheets and quilts. Other than the books in the exhibition cabinet, there were also fluffy toys. The pink desk was printed with white cat paw prints. It looked very cute. Even if it was a holiday, Cui Yingying would not laze around in bed doing nothing. Since she was a single-parent family with only one father, she was responsible for all the housework. Although her father had thought about hiring a nanny, she rejected the idea in the end. She felt that housework should not be done by someone who was not her family. At this moment, she could only smile bitterly as she sat on the bed. There was another girl lying on her lap like a large pet. "Emily, is your house okay?" Cui Yingying held a wooden comb and combed Emily's hair. The hairband that old Sue used to tie Emily's hair was placed on the table. Emily's golden hair flowed like a waterfall all over Cui Yingying's bed. Even Cui Yingying, who had no desires in terms of appearance, felt a little jealous when she caressed Jasmine's long golden hair. Her hair was so long that it reached her buttocks, and she couldn't feel the slightest bit of resistance from the comb all the way down. If Jasmine was willing to shoot a shampoo commercial, she would definitely be able to beat those female celebrities without even using special effects. No problem. Emily seemed to be enjoying the girl's lap pillow. She narrowed her eyes and snorted softly. The landlord is working. But didn't you always stay at home? After I got a dog. It was very annoying. Hey, you got a dog at home? What kind of dog? Pomeranian. Oh, small dogs are more experienced. Cui Ying nodded to show that she understood. It's not a small dog. Emily, who was lying on his stomach, stretched out his hands and made a gesture that would not be out of place even if he shouted, "Praise the sun," or "Rome." About this big. You're almost the same size as a human, right? Even if they are crossbreeds, Pomeranians can't grow so big. Cui Ying looked amused. She thought that Emily might have recognized the wrong dog. For example, the Samoyed, which was also snow white and had fluffy hair. Nature is truly wonderful. Emily didn't answer the question. No, that's not what I should be lamenting about, right? Cui Ying complained in her heart. But seeing that Emily didn't seem to have any intention of continuing, she didn't bother about the type of dog anymore. Instead, she continued to comb Emily's hair. Outside the window, the sound of the rain was still there, but from the sound of it, the rain seemed to have lessened a little. Cui Ying's movements gradually slowed down, which made Emily turn his head in confusion. He looked at her and found that she seemed to be distracted. She would occasionally show such an expression recently. To be exact, it was after the celebration of Jiangjin University. It was an expression that was somewhat confused, hazy, and at the same time, mixed with longing and sorrow. Emily felt that he seemed to occasionally see such an expression on Songyu's face. The sudden ringtone of the mobile phone brought Cui Ying back to her senses. She took out the mobile phone. After seeing the caller ID, the girl's face bloomed like a flower bud, becoming bright and full of vigor. Hello, is this Brother Chin? Yes, it's me. The voice on the other side was a little strange, as if it was the first time he called the opposite sex, and he was a little flustered. Last time, at Jiangjin University, thank you so much. No, it's nothing. At this time, Cui Ying realized that Emily was looking at her as if she was a monkey in the zoo. His eyes were full of interest as he looked at her, and a shy blush appeared on her face. Is there something you need? She tried to keep a straight face and asked seriously. However, this did not make Emily lose interest. The latter seemed to be even more excited. Although I'm a little embarrassed, can you come to my house? Oh, my address is... While Cui Ying was trying hard to remember the address, she saw Emily suddenly and slowly reach out his fist towards her. Then she gave him a thumbs up. What the hell? The girl almost could not help but complain. She was once again worried about the Su family's education policy. Oh, also remember to bring a set of women's clothes. It would be nice if there were clothes a size bigger than your body. I can grow up too. Because her attention was attracted by Emily's thumbs up, when Cui Ying heard what he said, she subconsciously thought that he was looking down on her body. She could not help but blurt out, "What growth?" No, nothing, please forget that sentence. Cui Ying was so embarrassed that she almost hid under the blanket. Anyway, I'm really sorry to trouble you, because you're the only person of the opposite sex who has contact information on my phone. Huh? Does this mean that as long as it's a girl, anyone can do it? Because there was too much information coming from the phone, Cui Ying's attention was completely diverted from Emily's hand gestures to the phone. Of course not. I can't explain it clearly over the phone. Anyway, this is definitely not something that anyone can ask for help with. But I think I can trust you, so can you help me? Okay, since it's Brother Chin, I'll treat it as repayment for last time. It's okay. Cui Ying's voice became softer and softer, and her face became redder and redder, like a ripe apple. If this was a manga, white smoke would be coming out of her head right now. What did you say? Sorry, I didn't hear you clearly. No, nothing. Then I'll hang up. The girl was like a bird startled by the twang of a bough, and she hung up without waiting for Chintoa's reply. Then she covered her face with the pillow next to her. Oh, what did I say? Emily, what should I do? But after waiting for a while, she did not hear a response. So she took off the pillow, only to find that the girl who was lying on her lap a moment ago had disappeared without a trace. Only the warmth of the bedsheet proved that the girl had not been gone for long. She looked at the desk again and found that the hair tie was gone. Instead, there was a piece of white paper with a Q version of Emily drawn on it. The girl stuck out her tongue and gave her a thumbs up. Shui Ying stared at this expression for a while. She did not know why, but she felt that Emily's expression was more of a troublemaker mode than a "I wish you success in your mission." Chapter 480. Snap. Su Shinxing looked at the broken table under his hand and couldn't help but be a little stunned. Oh, I just bought this table not long ago. Why is it broken again? The owner of the restaurant, who was watching TV with his legs crossed, heard the sound and looked over. After discovering that the table was broken, he smacked his lips and complained. Obviously, he didn't suspect that it was because of Su Shinxing. After all, this table was also a 3-piece plywood covered with plastic coating, and the table legs and frame below were made of stainless steel. Even if you found a black belt in Taekwondo and wanted to split it with a slap, he would probably only feel pain because of the reaction force. According to common sense, even if the owner cracked his head, he wouldn't think that Su Shinxing, who was wiping the table, broke the table into 2 pieces. Then, boss, old Su was a little nervous. He wasn't so nervous even when facing Loren and Voss's starship army that could destroy the world 2 days ago. What if he had to pay for it? He couldn't slap the owner who was kind to him to death, right? Little Su, throw this table out for me, and then rearrange the tables and chairs in the shop. In short, let's deal with it today first. The snack bar owner didn't show a sad face, but he was a little angry. Damn, I was wondering why the kid in second uncle's family would sell these tables to me so cheaply. It seems that the quality is quite poor. He even said that he was a relative, so he gave me a discount. See if I don't kill him the next time I see him. Although he didn't know who had helped him, Su Shinxing sincerely expressed his gratitude to him. With this gratitude, old Su ran out of the shop with the wreckage of the table on his head. The reason why he ran out of the shop was that the rain hadn't stopped yet. This was not the first time Su Shinxing made a mistake today. When he was washing the dishes just now, he accidentally crushed a bowl into powder. The reason for this mistake, in addition to Ying's prediction that Su Shinxing's strength was still slowly growing, was also one of the reasons why old Su was a little absent-minded today. After returning from the Space Administration in Midsurda, Su Shinxing did not have the leisure time to fully enjoy his holiday. On the contrary, there were still a lot of things waiting for him to do. First of all, he had skipped a day of work, so he had to work in the shop for the next 2 days. Secondly, Qin Xingyan seemed to have encountered some trouble, so the girl did not return to Sakura apartment for the past 2 days. She only called back to report that she was safe. Su Shinxing did not intend to interfere. Qin Xingyan had said before that she did not want to trouble Su Shinxing with everything. Therefore, Su Shinxing also decided to respect the girl's choice. Unless she asked him for help, he would not take the initiative to help. In addition, he was also worried about Song Yu's situation. Although he didn't know if he was overthinking it, Song Yu seemed to be focusing most of her energy on Sakura apartment recently. Due to Sakura apartment's uniqueness and isolation from the rest of the world, it would inevitably affect the girl's life and interpersonal relationships. To be honest, it wasn't a good sign. Other aspects aside, Su Shinxing did not think that he was a person who was worthy of the girl's sacrifice. This was why Su Shinxing let the girl face that superstar alone this time. He wanted the girl to be able to find her more confident self in the past. However, how to do it was one thing, whether to be worried or not was another. If he had to describe it, Su Shinxing's current mood was a bit similar to a father who let his young daughter run errand alone. He hoped that his daughter could be trained, but he was also worried that something would happen. If it were not for the limitations of objective conditions and self-esteem, he would have probably sneaked into the girl's house and secretly observed her. In addition to these things, there were also some more important things. For example, the condition of Mo Lee's body. Although Mo Lee appeared normal at the moment, eating, running, and stirring up trouble, Joshua could feel that part of the mana in his body seemed to be flowing away. It was a normal phenomenon after Mo Lee's third seal was undone, but it was not a solution to continue like this, which was why finding someone who could stabilize Mo Lee's seal as soon as possible was of utmost importance. It was a pity that the person who had placed the seal on Mo Lee was in some unknown world, or there would be no need for so much trouble. Moreover, Su Shenxing's own ever-increasing power was also a problem. Although he had coincidentally solved the situation once before, Su Shenxing did not believe that such luck would befall him again. Therefore, it was worth paying attention to find a feasible countermeasure as soon as possible to prevent the entire multiverse from collapsing in 3 years. If he thought about it that way, he, who was still leisurely throwing away garbage until now, certainly gave off the feeling of a salted fish that did not think about making progress. Su Shenxing muttered inwardly. When he returned to the shop, he found that there was an uninvited guest. "Yo, how are you?" Jiang Jin's current mushroom-headed Lord Earth God was calmly waving her short little hand to greet him. The boss who had been watching TV was no longer there, and from the sounds coming from the kitchen, he was probably preparing snacks for her. "I'm not good," Su Shenxing answered honestly. "It's okay, I don't mind," the girl continued to say shamelessly. "So, what's the matter this time?" Seeing that, Su Shenxing could not be bothered to play riddles with her, and went straight to the point. "Ahaha, maybe I just came out to take a look at you." The girl put on a shy look, but she was too small and looked like a child trying to seduce an adult, full of pretentiousness. Apart from Lilicons, probably no one would fall for her honey trap. Hehe. Su Shenxing's expression was cold. Since the last time he returned from the dream, this girl had been avoiding him whenever she saw him. She thought that she was very secretive, but Su Shenxing saw it all. It was fine if camouflage and the like did not work on old Su, but this girl always walked in the corner of the street with a millstone-sized mushroom on her head. Did she think that he was blind? Actually, a group of people seemed to have come to Jiangjin recently, and they were secretly doing something on Jiangjin's land. After the Earth God lowly laughed dryly again, she awkwardly confessed her purpose. "I thought that they were up to no good from their sneaky appearance, but neither I nor Miss could find out what they were doing, so I thought of you." Chapter 481. Someone Without a Face. Chun Tua frowned in confusion. In front of him sat the superstar Su Wei, who had just come out of the shower and was still wrapped in a towel. Although Chun Tua wanted her to make do with his clothes, his t-shirts were all plain white and thin. He estimated that the girl who had just come out of the shower would soon look like she was not wearing anything. Therefore, while trying hard to control his gaze from looking at some impolite places, Chun Tua also tried to divert his attention with topics that he was more interested in. For example, why did she run to the alley on the street alone, and why did she look so flustered? With this period of time to think, Chun Tua also calmed down. He felt that it was probably just like in novels, where the superstar girl was tired of the days with no privacy and many rules, so she ran away from home to have fun. At that time, she was only being chased by her manager and bodyguards. As for the demon aura, although there were basically no unruly demons in Jiangjin, there were still many strange existences. In this regard, Tianzi, who was a supernatural existence, was very sensitive to this. He pointed out to Chun Tua that there were many demons mixed in with humans. Those demons basically lived the same life as humans, so it was normal for him to accidentally encounter them and be contaminated with some demon aura. His previous response seemed to be a little over the top. After some reflection, he felt that it was probably because the supernatural events he had encountered were particularly harmful, so he had such a reaction. But not long after, he realized that he had relaxed too early. "Well, that was an accidental situation." The girl nodded and said, "I accidentally found my agent tearing off her face in the mirror, and under the skin, it was pure white." Perhaps it was because she recalled the scene at that time. Her face was very ugly, and there was a faint tremor in her voice. I was so scared that I ran away. I don't know if the other party found me. After that, I tried to keep a distance from my manager, but this made things even stranger. Until today. She paused and then said in a tone that even she herself could not believe, I saw the scene where my makeup artist's face was cut off by them. Chun-tua listened to her without saying anything. Perhaps it was because he was too indifferent. Sue felt that he didn't believe her words, so she could only laugh at herself. As expected, you don't believe me at all. In fact, even I feel that I might be the one who's crazy. No, Chun-tua said firmly, I believe it. That although it's strange for me to say this, why would you believe it so? Sue paused for a moment, then thought of a more reasonable word. Such a ridiculous story? Is it because you're my fan? No, I've never listened to your songs. Chun-tua didn't care about the impact his words had on the girl. He just continued, the reason why I believe you is because, first of all, isn't it always like this in the movies? The more it sounds like nonsense, the more real it is. Second of all, he pointed at the sword spirit floating beside him. Can you see what's here? Even if she saw something that was beyond common sense, Sue obviously did not activate her spirit vision because of this. She looked in the direction Chun-tua was pointing at. Naturally, she could not see anything. A sofa? Or air? So the girl could only try to understand Chun-tua's meaning while making wild guesses. Son of heaven, just take out something for her to see. Chun-tua said to the sword spirit. Of course, the sword spirit was unable to touch physical objects. Chun-tua only meant for her to use her spiritual energy to change the position of objects. I don't want that. The sword spirit refused without hesitation. I'm not an actor in a play. Why should I perform for ordinary people? I remember that there's still ice cream in the fridge. I can't help it. I'm not the kind of incapable ruler who doesn't listen to the advice of his subordinates. Since it's a request from the master of my most trusted subordinate, I'll listen to it for the time being. So the sword spirit, whose eyes emitted a strange light, immediately stretched out her hands, and the ashtray on the coffee table started to tap dance. This clearly frightened Sue, who could not hear the son of heaven's sword spirit's voice and only thought that Chun-tua was talking to himself, almost causing her to fall off the sofa. This is the place I just pointed to. There's a Een spirit, Chun-tua said calmly. The girl was even more shocked.
I'm not an Een spirit.
I'm an artifact spirit. No, with my great achievements, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that I'm an Een spirit or a god. The sword spirit on the side protested loudly. Of course, Chun-tua ignored the sword spirit's words as usual and continued to speak to Sue. Let me continue to answer your question. Why would I believe such a nonsensical story? Of course, it's because I've experienced a lot of stories that are even more nonsensical than what you said. That. Sue looked a little scared. Are you a human or a ghost? Chun-tua didn't expect that the first time he tried to act cool, he would receive such a response. I'm a human. Sue seemed to be relieved. She caressed her full breasts, not caring that Chun-tua had seen her entire northern hemisphere. Of course, it was also possible that she didn't notice it at all. You scared me to death. Compared to this, Chun-tua coughed lightly, ignoring the sword spirit who was shouting ice cream in his ear, and forced himself to look away from the cantaloupe again. Why did you come to Jiangjin? Since you know that there are monsters around you, isn't it better to go to places like Mount Wutai? Although Chun-tua knew that a certain person with thinning hair in Jiangjin was very powerful, he didn't know the extent of supernatural powers in other places in the country because he didn't have a comparison. He always thought that a certain person's combat power was quite common in the supernatural circle. My schedule was all arranged by my agent. A bitter expression appeared on Sue's face. And at that time I wasn't sure. I didn't even know what my manager was. I had nightmares for the past 2 days when I saw that scene. To be honest, even now, I have a feeling that the other party will suddenly come knocking on my door. Just as she finished speaking, the doorbell of Chintua's house rang strangely. Chapter 482. Although there was nothing scary about the sudden ringing of the doorbell, it also depended on the situation. For example, there was nothing scary about the usual ringing of the phone, but after watching Ring alone at 11 o'clock in the middle of the night, if the landline suddenly rang, even if one had guts all over their body, they would probably be scared out of their wits. What's more, people nowadays don't have guts all over their body, they have guts all over their body, okay? However, Chintua's guts had long been trained. He quickly calmed down and pressed his right hand in the air, indicating for Sue to calm down. Then, he turned around and looked at the sword spirit girl. The latter seemed to have a telepathic connection with him and nodded her head in understanding. Then, the sword spirit girl continued to control the ashtray and break dance. Chintua raised his hand and knocked her on the head. Only then did the sword spirit girl come back to her senses. She immediately became one with the sword and returned to the Emperor's sword. Sue saw Chintua pull out an antique longsword from behind his butt. In fact, he took it out from the special waist bag behind his waist, but because of the angle, the celebrity girl couldn't see it, and was surprised. She felt like she had seen a real-life version of the Death Teller grass. When Chintua tiptoed to the door and looked outside through the peephole, he breathed a sigh of relief. When he opened the door, the person standing outside was naturally Cui Yingying with a small plastic bag. Cui Yingying looked a little uneasy. Her small face was flushed, and she sweetly greeted Chintua. Chintua immediately asked her to come in. It was still raining outside. The girl walked into the room uneasily, and then saw the celebrity girl sitting on the sofa. The latter was still wrapped in a bath towel, and because of the situation just now, the bath towel was more like a prop to increase the seductiveness of the seduction than to cover the indescribable part. The so-called half-naked is sexier than the whole body was more or less the same meaning. Cui Yingying's face suddenly became extremely pale. Chintua knew that the current situation could easily lead to misunderstandings, so he quickly explained the situation to Cui Yingying in order to prevent the room from suddenly being filled with sorrow. In his opinion, Cui Yingying had also experienced that kind of unbelievable event during Jiangjin University's anniversary celebration, so her ability to accept this kind of story was definitely much better than that of ordinary people. Naturally, he didn't know that Cui Yingying could chat and laugh with Mo Li. Although he had lost some of his memories, he still vaguely knew a lot. Therefore, he accepted it faster than Chintua expected. Soon, she brought Sue into the room to change her clothes. In the end, when they came out again, the girl's expression had become hopeless. Sue, on the other hand, had changed the girl's normal casual clothes into a sexy and cute one that exposed her navel. She kept mumbling that her chest was too tight, and she could not breathe. Where were we? Chintua coughed dryly to draw their attention back to him before he asked, "They'll come at any time?" Sue raised a question. Was Shui ice cream? The sword spirit girl raised her arms and shouted. Oh right, because this matter might be more dangerous, see? Yingying, why don't you go back first? It's better if you don't get involved. Tuwazi ignored the Emperor's sword's complaint and said to Cui Yingying, I don't want to. Even if you want to burn the bridge after crossing the river, this is too fast. Cui Yingying immediately protested. Chintua was speechless. Speaking of which, Cui Yingying asked Sue, because she had already heard the other party's simple explanation of the situation, why did you come to Jiangjin? I already said that it was arranged by the manager. Sue seemed to have a good impression of Cui Yingying, so she patiently explained to the girl. Yes, that's why I'm asking. Cui Yingying nodded and said, why did those things come to Jiangjin? They even didn't hesitate to manipulate your schedule like this? This, I don't know either. Sue could only smile bitterly. At this moment, Chintua slapped his head. Oh right, Yingying, do you have the phone number of those guys? He suddenly came to a realization. The reason why he picked on this matter before was because he couldn't get in touch with the two great gods in Jiangjin. Now that Cui Yingying was here, he didn't have to continue shouldering everything by himself, right? He could contact them through Cui Yingying, After serving the Earth God Loli's jajang noodles, the boss let go of the burden. He said that he had made a last-minute decision to go to a nearby furniture store and buy the broken table today. Because this action was too abrupt, even Su Xinxing felt that something was wrong. This should be some kind of spell to get rid of irrelevant people. He glanced at the Earth God Loli, who seemed to not notice anything and continued to enjoy her noodles. A moment later, a few guys dressed like the Black Super Special Police appeared at the entrance of the store. They were all very tall and sturdy. If it was just based on height and sturdiness, any one of them could match up to two old Sus. After that, even with Yunlin's help, old Su's trash perception still took a long time to respond to him. Two Black Super Special Police climbed into the kitchen through the window. Are they monsters? After going on a killing spree in Jiangjin for so long, this was the first time old Su was blocked at the door, and he felt a strange sense of novelty. He asked the Earth God Loli. I don't know, these guys seem to have concealed their presence. When they got very close, they just barely noticed their presence. The Earth God Loli put down her chopsticks and wiped her mouth that was full of sauce. Old Su immediately felt relieved. Damn, so it wasn't just my trash perception this time, it was everyone else's trash. In the next moment, the Black Super Special Police took a big stride forward and quickly closed the distance, preparing to attack. In any case, Su Xinxing started out as a warrior. The moment those guys made their move, he predicted their purpose from the trajectory of their attacks. Their target was not him, but the Earth God Loli, who looked calm in the face of danger. If one of his own people was beaten up in his own territory, then Su Xinxing would not be able to survive. Therefore, although he had just participated in a real-world war in the Space Administration, Su Xinxing still made his move. When the fists of the two burly men at the front door came into contact with Su Xinxing's fleshy palms, it was like ice reaching into molten steel, instantly melting away. Judging from the cross-section of their broken limbs, they did not have human bodies. This made Su Xinxing feel even less of a psychological burden. His hands turned into claws, and with a light clasp, the heads of the two men in front of him were crushed, and the green liquid in his hand burst out. At the same time, the two Black Super Special Police finally arrived. They did not care about old Su, and looked at the Earth God Loli, who was still looking at old Su, and attacked with a Black Tiger Steel's heart. Chapter 483. As a result, the two burly men's fists penetrated the Earth Loli's body. But before they could pull their fists out, the Earth Loli's body turned into solid clay. The clay used by the Earth God as an incarnation and casting medium was naturally not ordinary clay, so they couldn't even pull their fists out for a while, and were trapped instead. You can't even see through their camouflage. It seems that the young lady is too careful. These guys shouldn't be worth our attention. The Earth Loli, who had unknowingly sat down at the back, slowly ate her noodles and said, "Is that so?" Su Xinxing casually squeezed the rest of the Super Black students to death. To him, there was no difference between a little monster who had just gained intelligence and a 1,000-year-old monster. It was all a matter of one punch, so he usually couldn't distinguish the strength of the enemy when he fought. However, since the Earth Loli, who could only be considered a small fry in the mythological era, said so, then the enemy probably wasn't that strong. After experiencing the Great War of Extinction, it was meaningless to come back and play with little monsters of this level. As he thought of this, the exhilaration of destroying the enemy completely disappeared, and everything became dull and dull. Then what about the remaining two? He pouted at the two little monsters trapped in the clay and asked the Earth Loli, "Let's just take them back. Otherwise, we won't be able to explain it to the young lady. By the way, you're already the real Earth God of Jiangjin. There's no need to continue worshipping that guy, right?" Su Xinxing frowned. To be honest, he didn't have a good impression of the former Earth God. No matter what, the young lady once rescued him from the sea of bitterness and brought him onto the path of immortality. Mr. Su, who was invincible from the beginning, you definitely don't understand. The Earth Loli smiled slightly. No one is invincible from the very beginning, Su Xinxing casually replied. The Earth god Loli did not continue to refute. She only shook her iconic mushroom head and placed the money for the noodles on the table. Then, she sank into the ground, and the two little monsters were dragged down with her. He hoped that the two of them wouldn't suffocate underground. Su Shinxing sincerely wished the two unlucky guys in his heart. Then he suddenly realized something. F***CK. This don't tell me I have to deal with it alone? Because he had acted so boldly before, the snack bar now looked like a murder scene. If the blood on the ground wasn't green but red, even if he was arrested and taken to the police station, no one would treat it as an unjust case. The Loli who had already left naturally wouldn't answer him, leaving old Su to wallow in self-pity. Since these little monsters came from the dog belt, the earth belt, taken away by the earth god, referred to as the earth belt, the tactic used to expel the idlers had probably failed. Su Shinxing had no choice but to release a little bit of his aura. As the highest creature, even if Su Shinxing only released a little bit of his aura, most creatures would subconsciously feel a sense of fear when they approached him. They would rather take a detour or delay for a while than continue to move forward. Of course, there would also be some sequelae. For example, the turnover of the shops on this street was estimated to have a subtle decline in the next month. Old Su could only apologize to the shop owners in his heart, who asked him to be an idiot when it came to magic. After buying himself some time, Old Su began to clean up the murder scene like a real murder. In theory, he could beat those corpses down to the molecular level of particles. However, after he did that on a corpse, he didn't know why he almost blew up the snack bar. Old Su, who didn't study physics well, didn't know whether it was a natural phenomenon or the result of the residual demon power in the monster's body. In short, it was impossible to make the corpse disappear. Therefore, Su Shinxing could only smash the corpse into minced meat with cloud scale. Then, he put it in a dustpan and poured it into a manhole not far away. The rats and cockroaches in the manhole should help him deal with the mincemeat. However, when he was pouring this pile of non-combustible garbage, Su Shinxing found a business card in the pocket of a corpse. Enchanting Entertainment? It sounds familiar. If he couldn't remember it, it meant that it wasn't important. Su Shinxing, who used this as his creed, immediately threw this matter to the back of his mind and began to mop all the green juice on the ground. After doing all this, he wiped his sweat. I can finally rest for a while. Has the rain stopped? After getting himself a bottle of Coke, he casually found a seat and turned on the TV hanging in the corner of the snack bar. News. The police have begun to investigate the disappearance of Enchanting Entertainment's artists. As soon as the news jumped out, he almost spat out the Coke in his mouth. Damn it, I just killed two monsters here, and you've already gotten the news and started investigating? You're even on the news? Do you have to be so fast? However, after watching for a while, he found that things were not quite what he thought. The people he had just killed were not the missing people in the news. In fact, the missing people in the news were all celebrities, and the people Su Shinxing killed were obviously not celebrities. Judging from the business card he got, the other party should be an agent or a bodyguard. In other words, the missing people in the company were all done by these little monsters. This is really big news. There were many man-eating monsters in the world, but most of them only dared to secretly eat one or two unknown people. Only the new monsters would have the idea of making big news. Because the experienced monsters knew that once they were noticed, they would be quickly dealt with, and public figures like eating celebrities were undoubtedly one of the fastest ways to attract the attention of the super administrator. Su Shinxing enjoyed the feeling of the carbonation. After burping, he scratched his head hesitantly. How about I tell Xiao Jingyi about this later and let the super administrator find all the remaining monsters in the company? However, after thinking about it, he felt that the super administrator was not an idiot. They probably already noticed the problem, so there was no need for him to go and ask for a rebuff. The top management of Enchanting Entertainment also said that they will do their best to ensure the safety of their artists, especially the recently popular little diva Su Wei. They even sent several bodyguards to secretly protect her. Pa Ji. Su Shinxing's face paled, and the Coke bottle in his hand was unconsciously crushed by him. Song Yu's house, 10 minutes ago. Long time no see, Sue. Songyu opened the door and found Sue standing outside. Behind the superstar, there were two bodyguard-like figures standing there like iron towers. Because he was going to meet Sue, Songyu naturally did a little research on her. He knew that Xiaoying Entertainment was not doing well recently, so he did not take the two bodyguards seriously. Hello, Songyu. The other party's expression did not change much, and he just greeted her softly. What's wrong with your voice? Songyu frowned slightly and asked curiously. Cold, just a cold. The other party answered briefly. Oh, I see. Songyu did not suspect him. After all, it was normal for a cold to have a strange voice. You're a singer now. You have to take good care of your voice. Aren't you going to invite us in? Sue, who was still expressionless, said.
Oh, sorry.
Please. Before the word enter could leave her mouth, Songyu's phone rang. She took it out and saw that it was a call from Sakura Apartment. Because the group of superhumans at Sakura Apartment had been sent to work by old Sue, there was often no one in the apartment. You couldn't expect Gomei or Dahei to answer the call, right? As for why the call was transferred to Songyu's phone, the girl guessed that it was because Su Xinqing's phone had run out of battery. His phone was already very old, and the battery naturally did not last long. In this era of smartphones, old Sue's phone could still be replaced with a new battery, so one could imagine how old it was. As for why he did not change his phone, was there a need to ask? Because he was poor. After hesitating for a moment, Songyu decided to answer the phone. Sorry, I have to answer the phone first. After apologizing to Sue with a smile, the girl picked up the phone. Hello? Is this Mr. Su's house? A male voice that seemed to be in the middle of a voice change came from the phone.
Who are you?
Why are you looking for Xinqing? Songyu asked. The other party was silent for a moment. Songyu even felt that she could hear that the other party seemed to be hesitating about something. But soon, the man replied. My name is Chen Tua. You may have heard of my name. Songyu felt that this rather rustic name was indeed somewhat familiar. When Su Xinqing and Xiao Jingyi were talking, she seemed to have heard this name before. But then, Chen Tua's words made the girl's hair stand on end. In short, please tell him that many staff members in Xiaoying Entertainment have been killed and replaced by faceless monsters. Xiaoying Entertainment's Sue found out about this, and is now hiding from the monster's search at my place. Songyu looked at Sue outside the door with her eyes wide open. Almost subconsciously, she slammed the door with the hand holding the door handle. But Sue, on the other side of the phone, might have also heard the voice on the phone. Her hand was one step ahead of the door, so Songyu could not close the door. The next moment, Songyu only felt a strong force on her hand. She could not even hold the door handle and was directly knocked out of the door. She fell at the entrance and rolled 3 meters away. The dizziness and the pain of being hit in many places almost took away the girl's consciousness. Almost. When the girl's consciousness was about to fade away, the sea serpent's pearl in her hand shone brightly. A warm current flowed through her limbs and bones, lifting Songyu's spirit. Even the pain on her body seemed to be alleviated a little. At least, she had regained the ability to move. So Songyu immediately stood up and ran home. Perhaps Sue and the two bodyguards were not good at running, or perhaps they wanted Songyu to experience the feeling of being gradually drowned in despair and being slowly choked by the throat. They were not in a hurry to chase after Songyu. Instead, they slowly approached the girl at a normal walking speed. Songyu ran into the room and locked the door. Then, she began to think of a way to escape. Judging from the fact that the anti-theft door had been dented by the enemy, a mere wooden door would definitely not be able to stop them. Therefore, instead of sitting here and waiting for death, it was better to take a gamble and see if there was a way to escape. So, when the 3 people broke into the room, what they saw was a wide open window and a bedsheet that was tied into a rope and lowered from the window. Although Songyu's house was on the 9th floor, because of the design, there was a small protruding balcony on the 7th floor. The rope made of the bedsheet and quilt just hung there. The 3 people jumped down from the window one by one, as if they were going to chase after Songyu. But the 2 bodyguards had already jumped down. Sue had just stepped onto the window when she stopped. Sue turned her head and looked at a walnut wardrobe in the room. She stretched out her hand. Her originally human hand turned into a huge sharp blade, and then she slashed at the wardrobe fiercely. The wardrobe was immediately torn apart. Song-yu, who was hiding inside, was lucky enough to escape the disaster. She only rolled out of the wardrobe. She crawled up in a sorry state. She did not expect Sue to discover that she was hiding in the wardrobe. The idea that she came up with in a flash of inspiration ended up in vain. Sue's body split vertically from her nose all the way to her diaphragm. The way it slowly opened made one think of the mouth of a giant beast. The rib-like bones in the crack now looked like jagged teeth. Seeing that Song-yu was about to be killed by this monster, at this critical moment, a red light flashed and forced Sue, who was already beyond recognition, to take a few steps back. "Senior, are you alright?" Then, Qin Xingyan, who was wearing a cloud-white Taoist robe and had a bundle of yellow paper talismans pinned to her leg, jumped in from the window and stood in front of Song-yu. "Thank goodness we made it in time. Xingyan, we'll talk about other things later. Let's get out of here first. If there's only one horse, it won't be able to stop me from escaping. But it's okay, please believe in me." Qin Xingyan controlled another cyan flying sword and was about to break out of the encirclement with Song-yu. However, at this moment, two heavy objects fell to the ground. The two bodyguards, who had just been deceived by Song-yu and were now completely devoid of human form, jumped back to the window again. They stared at the inside of the room with their eyes full of flesh. "But there are 3 monsters coming to catch me. It's over." Chapter 484. Just at this critical moment, a black crack suddenly appeared between Sue and Song-yu. Qin Xingyan. Immediately after, the sound of glass shattering could be heard. The space on both sides of the crack also shattered, causing the black crack to look like a ghastly scar as it slowly expanded. The next moment, the crack suddenly distorted, like a TV with bad reception. It flickered a few times before completely disappearing. And, at the place where the crack appeared, there was suddenly another person. No, to be precise, there were 2 people. Emily, who was held by Su Xinqing's waist, waved his short limbs. It looked like a salted fish's final struggle before losing its dream. Report, the 4th type world at coordinates GX43220 has an anomaly. Anomaly parameters have been integrated, and the situation has been reported. There's a fault in the world? Far away in the World Observation Center of the Space Administration of Midsurda, a staff member who was monitoring the world's data immediately reported the anomaly he discovered. Because of the previous war, Midsurda was in a state of many things waiting to be done. It was possible that some people in the sovereign world felt that Midsurda was about to die. In a fit of anger, they wanted to kill a god to prove themselves and increase the workload here. Therefore, in order to prevent a second destruction and ensure that the holidays would not be affected, under the pressure of other parties, the World Observation Center expanded the detection range by 3 times. Even the 4th type world, unconfirmed world, that wasn't usually taken seriously was included in the observation target. The intention was to nip any suspicious situations in the bud. Coordinates GX 43,220. Lux, who was forced to stay in the World Observation Center because of a lack of manpower, immediately opened his world map and began to search for that world. That's right, that world has been confirmed to have a level 3 civilization. I think it can be listed as a key observation target. Wait, there's a data distortion. The fault in the world has been corrected? The staff member looked at the screen in front of him with a dumbfounded expression. Okay, if it's that world, you don't have to worry about it. After Lux confirmed that it was a world that was strangely familiar to him, he closed the map and said to the staff member whose worldview had been turned upside down. But this kind of unbelievable situation is definitely worth observing. There's no buts. Lux interrupted the staff member's words and said in an unquestionable tone, "That world is a special entity. To tell you the truth, even if that world suddenly explodes, you don't have to care. Maybe in 2 days, it will grow back on its own. Grow back on its own, it's not a pumpkin. The staff member complained in his heart. But in the end, he didn't dare to argue with Lux as a war hero and silently returned to his seat to continue his work. Luke, on the other hand, activated the mainframe computer on his ship and deleted all the abnormal data. Since I've helped you so much, please don't make too much of a fuss. Luke could only pray in his heart for this boss that was completely out of his common sense. Su Xinqing, who had been styling himself, sneezed. Because of this, finally Li Mo was Mo. But just as she made a long-live gesture, a monster by the window couldn't help but attack her. The monster's right hand split open like a flower bud, revealing a bone structure filled with shark teeth. Like an octopus, it clawed at Mo Li's head. But Mo Li's attention was attracted by a black cat hiding under the bed. He didn't even notice the monster's attack. In the blink of an eye, all right, that unlucky fellow didn't even manage to touch Jasmine before he was turned into a stone statue by the petrifying spirit energy that was triggered by Jasmine's hostility. Along with the cool breeze that blew in from the window, the ground was covered in sand. It seems that Song Yu will have a headache on how to clean the house. At the same time, Su Xinqing finished his meaningless gesture. He stretched out his right hand, holding the weapon he used to split open space. A pair of disposable chopsticks. Actually, it was a pair of chopsticks, but when he wanted to capture Mo Li, he wanted the little guy to give him the teleportation physical coordinates. One of the chopsticks was bitten off by the angry Mo Li. Su Xinqing's chopsticks were aimed straight at Su Wei. Maybe it was because, as a fiend demon, her intuition was much sharper than a human's. Almost at the moment when Su Xinqing attacked, Su Wei seemed to have sensed the aura of death and suddenly retreated a few meters. Luckily, Song Yu's family was quite rich, and the house wasn't small. Otherwise, Su Wei would probably have to stuff herself into the wall. At this time, the difference between fiends and demons was incisively and vividly displayed. In order to prevent Su Xinqing from chasing after Su Wei, the other fiend demon on the windowsill that no longer had a human form resolutely pounced towards Su Xinqing. It probably bought half a second for its companion, but the moment it pounced over, Su Xinqing's left hand pierced through its head with a pair of dragons playing with a pearl. Thankfully, Qin Xingyan blocked most of Song Yu's vision. Otherwise, in a sense, this rather bloody scene might have traumatized the girl, even though the blood of these monsters was green in color. That was all. Half a second might not be of much use to an ordinary person, but for a fiend demon, it was enough to do something. This guy really stuffed himself into the wall. It seems like this fiend demon also had the ability to escape through the earth. Mo Li. It wasn't that old Su couldn't do it himself, but if he continued to tear down the walls and the floor, the building might collapse in a few more hits. At this time, Mo Li's role was highlighted. The little girl who was pulling the cat's tail, the Xiaohei cat, did not manage to escape from the girl's vicious grasp, stomped her feet. Immediately, the ground, walls, and ceiling started to ripple like the surface of a lake in the rain. A moment later, Su Wei was thrown out from the floor. Fortunately, Mo Li acted in time, otherwise, this fiend demon would have escaped. However, after Su Xinqing killed the fiend demon that Qin Xingyan's flying sword could not even injure, he realized that he had been tricked. What was thrown out was only the fiend demon's shell. Its body was not there. There was a hole in the fiend demon's heart. That's why I hate fiend demons. Su Xinqing smacked his lips and said, "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."